Hello everybody, welcome to the director's commentary for the 2016 fan film remake of King Kong. My name is Jack Buchanan, I'm the writer, producer, and director of this film, and for the next 2.5 hours we're going to be discussing what went into the making of this film and some of the stories that went on behind the scenes, and all for your entertainment, so let's get at it. So the first thing I should obviously point out is, when we were cutting the film originally, the original cut and everything, we realized that there wasn't much in terms of a backstory to Skull Island, especially given the fact that this takes place basically in the present time around 2013. So we had to come up with a prologue, but we really didn't have time to shoot one, so we decided to just come up with sort of a written scripture prologue, kind of similar to a lot of films I grew up with in the 90s and stuff. I always loved movies that have a prologue to their backstories. So for me, writing this up was pretty fun because there's a lot of homages and notes to the other Kong films, especially in the year and dates. I also wanted to point out where the natives came from and how they were all inhabiting the island, and essentially how the island essentially survived after 65 million years of all the dinosaurs and stuff that inhabit it. So that was all fun to come up with during the process of writing this prologue. Now, when I was basically, the idea for this film to basically be made was back in, I believe, 2011. No, it was like 2011 or 2012. Or, no, it was actually 2010, my mistake. 2010, I was visiting Hollywood, California, and I had just gone to the Universal Studios backlot. And I had just enjoyed the brand new Kong attraction, the 3D attraction that just came out. And at the time, I was using a brand new camera. Before that, I was using really crappy Lego webcams for all my films, and had ended up essentially making these little stop-motion movies. But then I just got this new 720p HD camera. And when I was visiting Universal and seeing Kong and everything, and still realizing there was still some of the pop culture enjoying this character, I figured, hey, my computer technology's gotten better, my camera equipment has gotten better, why don't I try to do a remake I've always wanted to do? So that was initially the spark of the idea. Aside from that, it was, watching all the Kong DVDs, visiting Universal Studios back in '98 and seeing Confrontation, as well as seeing the original King Kong and the 1976 film as a child. It was really the inspiration for me to love this story and remake this classic film. So yeah, here we are on the Venture. Now, the Venture is an interesting how we were able to get this ship to be used in the production. So obviously we needed a ship. That was a given. And basically what I did is my dad, the producer, Walter Buchanan, had contacts with the Toronto Fire Department. And luckily they were able to let us shoot there for 2 days. So we were able to get the whole whack of the essential Venture shooting all done in 2 days, which is pretty spectacular. All shot in the span of 2 years, mind you. Now, the Venture's bridge is interesting because this is just my laundry room. At the time, we weren't thinking about we were going to get an actual ship or we were going to get a bridge for it, so we made this makeshift bridge that was just in my laundry room, and we used my laundry machine and put some computer monitors and stuff all over there. This is basically either the bridge, or as I like to see it, as more as like the captain's cabin, essentially. Which is why Jack has all these paintings and stuff in the background. So I like to see this as like the captain's cabin, essentially, more than I would say the bridge. If I were able to get a bridge, I would, which there was on the ship, but by the time we got to the ship, we already had shot all the stuff and we didn't want that whole day going to waste. Now, there's a note here, there's a little homage to Jessica Lange. When Denham goes to make a phone call, he says, I gotta call Dwan. And Dwan was the name of Jessica Lange's character in the 1976 film. Here we have Weston, played by Thomas Love Keogh. Great guy to work with. He's worked with me on a bunch of projects, and I just basically had him on set one day, and they said, hey, you want to play Weston? Because we had one person in mind to play Weston who we were in high school with, and unfortunately I never heard back from him, so I hired Thomas instead. And I know a lot of people are kind of iffy about the costume because I know, like, it's supposed to take place in present time, and a lot of these characters sometimes wear 1930s clothing. That was only because, like, we just wanted to pay homage to the original Kong, as well as just kind of we really didn't have anything else to put on for the actors, so we just slapped a house coat on him and a scarf and a, like, 1930s hat, and that was our Weston. And I know it's a bit of a shoot job, but it worked pretty well, I found. So, back to the venture. So yeah, we shot basically for about 2 days out on the Toronto harbor. The ship never left port. That was one of the rules when we were shooting, is that they wouldn't let us film while they were out in open water because of safety hazards. So we did our best to frame the shots where you couldn't see the skyline of Toronto, or you couldn't see any ships or anything in the background, to make it a pure ocean, which is more difficult than it sounds when you're shooting just on a lot, on like the docking areas of the place, and making it look like you're out at sea. But a lot of this, and I know the color, we also tried to do color timing in this, because again, we only had like a couple hours to shoot per day. So anything that was nighttime, I would just do in color timing, because that was the only way to do it. This shot is obviously, this whole opening titles, and this shot especially, is a homage to the opening of the 1976 film, when Charles Grodin says, "Here's to the big one." And yeah, a lot of this, the opening credits, this was essentially going straight from the opening credits of the 1976 film, because the Peter Jackson remake did more of a homage to the original, so I figured why not do the other Kong remake that a lot of people seem to forget about nowadays. And yeah, so a lot of this was, yes, I will admit, a lot of this was stock footage off YouTube. Because the thing is, like, when you're shooting a movie, and especially on a very shoestring budget, and you have no way to film ships out at sea, your best bet is to just get stock footage and match the ship that you shot on with the footage. So that's what essentially I did. I looked all over YouTube for certain ships and stuff that would match the ship we shot on, as well as kind of make it look like more of a research vessel. So that's why it's a Canadian ship rather than a, you know, something in another country. So the whole backstory, I guess you could say, that I actually kind of wrote down. What's really cool about writing the script is that I actually ended up writing a bunch of back history with each character. So the whole thing is that, well, Carl Denham is from Hollywood and a big-time filmmaker. He has hired a Canadian research vessel, because I guess they're cheaper, but it's ported in Surabaya. So that's why the ship was in Surabaya and not in Canada, because, you know, how you're able to do that in Canada is beyond me, but I figured because Surabaya is where the 76 film opened, that's where I wanted to set the ship in. So he hired the ship from Canada and then ported it over to Surabaya, so, and that would also, I guess, mean that Jack Driscoll is Canadian, but I think he was more American, who's just piloting a ship. And another thing I did point out is that, yes, the ship is called the SS Venture, but it's actually owned by the Engelhorn Corporation, which is an oil company that I created specifically for this film, and is also a homage to Captain Engelhorn from the original, because he is not in this film. He's instead replaced by Jack Driscoll as the captain. Now, this scene is actually straight out of the original film, when Jack Driscoll is asking about where they're going, and Denham says, you know, "Have you ever heard of Kong?" was all inspired for this scene. The script went through several changes throughout production. We tried our best to basically stick with the first draft, but halfway through shooting, we realized there was just too much going on, and it was really complicated. So halfway through shooting, I actually did a complete revision of the script and abridged the film to a much better degree to make it shorter. The original script was about over 200 pages, and there was just so much in it that there was no way we'd be able to finish the film on time. So, yeah, I rewrote the script to about 150 pages, and basically had it where it's a lot tighter version of the story. The whole get-up with Denham's costume, a lot of the costuming in this film, Denham's costume was actually based on, one of the things I like to use as reference in pre-prepping my films is because back in the old days I used to make a lot of Lego movies, and when I was doing pre-production on this film, a lot of the costume inspirations, I would just take Lego figures and kind of come up with the best combination of what the characters would look like. And Denham's costume specifically is based on the Steven Spielberg minifigure from the Lego Studios line. So I basically used that as reference, did my concept art around it, and then decided how the costume would look. The map of Skull Island is interesting. If you look at it closely, you'll see where the jungles of Skull Island are. It constantly says hell, hell, hell all over it. Another thing I did try to do was basically make it where the native areas and the wall are split between the jaw of the island, where the wall and all the native inhabitants are on the bottom jaw, and then you have to go across the top of the skull to get to the rest of the island. Now, back to costuming, what was interesting about doing costuming for this film is that I was, again, because this was a low-budget film, most of what I bought was from thrift stores, Salvation Army, and some of the main costume pieces like Jack's hat and so on was mostly bought from actual costume stores because that was a lot easier, or party stores. You can find all kinds of themed costumes there. And here we have Sylvana Boonstraw's Ann Darrow. Now, the way Anne was coming around, in the script, she is described as a very kind of anime schoolgirl-esque character, you know, probably in, like, at the end of last year in high school or in college. But I did write her essentially as sort of like your typical anime high school girl, just very sweet, very kind, but also can be very independent when need be. My biggest inspiration was probably Kagome from Inuyasha, which is, like, one of my favorite series, and I love that character, and I figured that character mixed with the character of Ann Darrow would be perfect for my version of Kong. And so when we were shooting the movie, we spent 2 years filming without an Anne. And that was mostly because my original actress who I wanted to play the part unfortunately had to bail because she was working a full-time job. So I spent 2 years searching for an Anne, and by the time I got out of high school, because we started shooting this around the time I was on my last year in high school. And by the time I was out of high school, I was still with no luck without an Anne. So around late 2012, second year in production, I basically put out a Kijiji ad, and Kijiji is essentially the Canadian version of Craigslist, just looking for an actress. I did get a few people, but they were wanting to be paid actresses, and all our actors were not paid, by the way. They were volunteer, and God bless their souls, they stuck with it to the end. So I contacted, there's this one girl who contacted us and said she was interested, and the way it worked is that I actually had coffee with her at a coffee cafe and interviewed her, and it was exactly like the original film when Carl Denham is pitching his employment to Anne. So I thought it was a very surreal experience how reality imitates art, or life imitates art in a sense. So it was pretty interesting that Sylvana came in and we shot all her stuff in the span of a year, which was great, and she was a real sport on this film. She has a couple of kids, mind you, and so raising your kids and also coming in to do volunteer hours in a film, huge dedication right there. And here we have Bradley Dunn as Herb Cooper. Cooper, obviously his last name because inspired by Merian C. Cooper, and a lot of this character was based on the 2005 film. Now, yeah, so Bradley's really great. The entire cast of this movie was phenomenal. Jake Robertson, who steals the show in this movie. Like, when I first pitched it, it's funny how me and Jake met. We actually met through summer camp at the time, and this was like before I got into high school. And when we were at summer camp together, he wanted to kill me. I'm not kidding. Like, he wanted to kill me, and we were kind of bitter enemies at camp. But then the second year I was in high school, I went to a different school, and I realized we were in the same class together, and I was like, oh no. I was thinking, this guy's gonna try to kill me whenever he can. But over time, throughout the years in high school, we just started chatting, and we became very good friends, and now best friends at this point. And by the time I got to working on Kong and getting into pre-production, I said, how would you like to be the villain? And, you know, and play like one of the main characters in this movie. And he's like, I got nothing better to do, why the fuck not? So he was on it from the very beginning, and he was the perfect casting choice for Denham. He enjoyed every second just playing this very overt villain, this very suspicious character. Now, these shots here of Jake talking about Kong and the dialogue was actually a reshoot because when we were filming on the Venture, the wind was so bad and we didn't have a mic at the time. In fact, the camera we were shooting, I'm actually using right now for this commentary, the mic was so bad and the wind was terrible that it ruined the dialogue, and I didn't want to go back and dub it. because also the shots weren't that good. So basically we reshot this in my bathroom and replicated what the ship looked like. Very cheap trick, but it does kind of work in a sense. So we just shot this in the bathroom, and it was about maybe shot for 15 minutes, and then we moved on to the next scene. So, yeah, a lot of this, there is a backstory as well of how Denham got the map, because it's stated that the map actually came from a 1933 expedition and drawn out by a crazy sailor and had been in the care of the U.S. government in secret files in the Pentagon or something for close to 80 years. And because Denham had heard rumors of Skull Island, he hired somebody to infiltrate the Pentagon and steal the map and then bring it to him so he could chart out where it is. And that's the whole backstory. We had actually cut, when we were shooting this and I was telling Jake the backstory, he was like, this would make a good movie on its own. Just this guy, this filmmaker who confiscates, the map to the island. And we had this whole idea where, like, Denham would meet the person who has the map in, like, Costa Rica, and he would just be sitting and having lunch in Costa Rica, very Jurassic Park-esque, and there'd be this whole chase scene where they're chased by government people and then they get away. But, I mean, that might be a film someday, or a little short story. So this first scene with Anne is basically, yeah, very similar to the 2005 film when Anne is doing a scene in the sunset out at sea. The camera we used for this film, the prop cameras that Denham uses, yes, they are VHS cameras, and we had about maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of them on set, and some as backup. And how we got those props was actually because my dad had been producing a show called Wake Stock a few years ago, and he was due to essentially leave and retire. And what happened was that after Wake Stock, they were moving facilities, and they were clearing out a bunch of old technology, a bunch of old equipment. So there was all these cameras lying around in storage. So I asked my dad, are you guys going to be using these cameras? And he said no. So I said, why don't I use them, and I'll make them, put them to good use. So yeah, I took 4 cameras off that, and we used all of them, and there's only really one left that actually works, because these cameras took a beating. They were tossed, they were thrown, they tipped over, and there's only really one left that essentially works as a functioning camera, and I would love to shoot something on one of those one day. Do a shot on Shitio film. So, a lot of the dialogue essentially is the backstory and everything. The original concept for this film was to base it solely on the 1996 draft that Peter Jackson was putting out back in the 90s, as well as the Bull Goldman script from 75. Both were going to be done by Universal. And we took a lot of inspiration from those scripts, but we also wanted to set it in the present time and make it more realistic, like what if Kong showed up today? So, one of the things I actually had to do was take elements from the previous Kong films and just basically make a giant sandwich. And that's what turned out to be in the original draft, about 250 pages, and I had to cut it down to about 150 pages. I love these shots, by the way, because these were clever, because what I did was, we had the actors do all their scenes, and to make it look like open water, I got to the top of the ship, the very top, where most people couldn't be able to go, and filmed them below, and we just shot this whole montage in about a half hour. Essentially, because there was just so much we were able to do. And funny enough, that's Brett there actually reading the script. I figured, hey, if you're going to be doing something, look at the script and we can make it look like Denham's script. Which, whenever you're on a set and you need a scene where somebody's looking at the script, just have the actual script handy. But yeah, so there's a lot of just showing Jack and Anne essentially forming a relationship. And I do like this bit where this scene was straight out of the original draft, because the whole backstory with Anne is that she was supposed to be going on a secret mission to Skull Island to photograph it and study it under her father's inheritance, because she was supposed to get the inheritance to her father's fortune after she passed away. And unfortunately, his lawyers now had control of it and pretty much blackmailed to saying, find this island and, and because the dad was essentially going to be looking for the island as well, they said, find this island and we'll give you your father's fortune. So she was doing this out of essentially blackmail and as a final wish for her father, but unfortunately a lot of that was pretty much left out of the final storyline in the film. And here we are on Skull Island. Now, the fog bank, that is footage off YouTube of some sort of, like, cloud of fog storm coming into a shoreline, but it looks so good I had to use it essentially as the fog for the island. And it's very difficult to find shots like that for a film like this. Now, funny enough, the 2 days we filmed on the venture, we shot them in the span of a year. There was 1 year we went and shot, and then there was another year we went back and shot with all of Andero. Now, these scenes here, this is from the first time we shot it, and when we were filming, it was around March, and in Canada, it's still snowing. So, when we were filming, it was a very nice day, clear skies, but by the time halfway through the day, it started snowing. So, you'll notice little snowflakes in the background of it filming and everything. When we're filming, it's like there's snowflakes occasionally in the background. I do like that bit where, like, the whole idea is that, yes, Skull Island is uncharted, but there is sort of a set of bellboys covering a couple miles or kilometer radiuses around the island, pretty much as a communicator to any ships that go near the island are ordered to come back by the government, essentially. That was the concept that I have, and that's why any ships that do go into the island never come back, but even those that come close to the island have to turn away and be directed to the authorities. Now, yeah, here we are on Skull Island, and yes, it's supposed to be in the shape of a skull, but we wanted to make it a huge island, very similar to, like, Isla Sorna in the Lost World Jurassic Park, is essentially what we were going for. These shots of the POV of the camera, of Denham's camera, I would just have a background play, I would film that, and then just mask in a digital shot of the recorder, which is a really cool effect. I like doing that. I also tried to give it that black and white feel, like kind of like the old VHS cameras. Denham's film, it's always in, like, all the films, it's like, what the hell is he even making? And I like to think I like the whole concept, the idea that I came up with is that Denham basically revived the national drama, which is basically something that Merian C. Cooper and Ernest Shosak, the original creators of Kong, did before they made the movie. Was they created natural dramas where they would go to exotic places, film all this B-roll, and then later would come back and film a story. So the whole idea is that Denham would be just getting all this really great footage for his film and then come back and actually make a legit movie out of it. It's sort of like filming, like, a big event and then filming a plot afterwards, or writing it afterwards. These shots of the boat heading to the island, this was shot at a local summer camp I go to called Camp Kennebec. Great summer camp, by the way. And they have all these motorboats because they take the kids out tubing. So I took advantage of that, and I asked the counselors if we could have this bit where we have the crew go ashore on one of the motorboats. So we got that shot. I was placed on the beach, and I got that shot out of them in the distance going to one of the shorelines out on the lake. And we had stand-in actors for that shot as well. The beach of Skull Island, this was basically shot at a local beach where we're at on Lake Simcoe, which is in Ontario. And there's this great beach that a lot of the locals go to. It's a small little beach, but we filmed this around, March or April, because at the time, the snow was just melting, nobody's going out swimming, and nobody's going to the beaches yet, so we filmed it at a time during the season when nobody really goes around yet. They only come in late summer, so we shot all the Skull Island Beach stuff in a day, essentially. We shot this all in a day, very early on, from, like, I'd say 9 a.m. till, like, 6 p.m., and we got all the coverage we needed, and it was great. Anything else of, like, and near the cliff sides and everything, that was shot on a different location in a sand pit down where I live. And I'll get to all the locations where I'm at later. So this bit is actually out of the deleted scenes for the Peter Jackson film, where they're filming on a beach and Anne screams and Kong's roar is heard, and that's what causes them to keep going to the island. So because that scene was cut, I basically wanted to add it into my own movie, and I felt it was a great scene in the trailers when that came out. And I was really wondering why the hell they never put it in. So in this, I figured I'd make up for that by adding it into my own version of the movie. Now, most people might not know this, but Anne's scream is actually somebody else, because, unfortunately, poor Sylvana, she could act, she could do all this great dialogue, But when I was telling her to scream, she's like, I can't do it. She tried it once, and it just didn't really work, and I felt so bad for her that she couldn't scream, so I told her, don't worry, we'll get somebody to dub it over, and that's what we did. And luckily, there was a girl who was one of our neighbors next door, one of their daughters. She could scream great, so I had her come over and just did all the screams in our house in the studio, and she just did about maybe a lot of screams. She did maybe a total of about 30 screams, and they all looked great. Now, I love that shot. That's one of my favorite shots put together for the movie, because the entire wall of Skull Island was a miniature. And it was a miniature built in the span of 2 months, 2 or 3 months. We had to design concepts for it, how to build it, and it was, buying all the pieces was all, like, just getting all that together, and then gluing it and putting it all together was amazing. The main core of the wall, which the gate and the pillars, was actually, there were 2 cardboard boxes that we painted to make them look like, you know, these stone pillars. I drew all the details with a Sharpie and marker and everything, and then the gates were hinged onto the cardboard, and the gates themselves were these fence pieces that, I then layered with, what are they called? Cattails, and just glued it all on and put it all together, and it was only made for the one shot where Kong smashes the wall later. And the rest of the wall was actually bamboo fencing, because I always liked the idea of a bamboo wall, which has not really been done in a Kong film. So here we are with the natives. Now, the natives are interesting. I know a lot of people have had their minor issues with the natives. The reason this came about was because when we were doing the core shooting, we were low on extras. I'm not gonna lie. We only had, like, the main crew on hand for most of shooting. But I know for big crowd stuff, we needed natives, we needed New Yorkers. So what I essentially did is, like, all the crowd stuff and all the extras in filming this movie were shot at Camp Kennebec at the summer camp. So I just asked the theater club if we could just, whoever was in the theater club, if we could use them for filming. So all the kids were great sports, really nice kids to work with, and we just had them, you know, put face paint on, put these kind of Hawaiian skirts on, and we just let them go to town. It is very much like Lord of the Flies, I'm not gonna lie. It is actually kind of funny to watch. They get the biggest laughs from the crowd whenever we screen this movie. We also have a plot point where, I believe, yeah, like, they have a plot point where they do find the oil, and that's from the 76 draft, where the whole concept is that the natives use the oil to lube up the door so they can get it open for sacrifices. So, this shot of the oil was just really just during a rainy day, and there was a couple of mud puddles outside, and I just basically took some olive oil and poured it onto one of the puddles and mixed it together to give it that kind of oil look. And yeah, you have the Witch Doctor, which is out of the 76 remake, where there's the ape Witch Doctor that, you know, pretty much is the stand-in for the groom. I do like this bit where Herb is the one that gets them spotted. So, all this stuff, so basically this whole native scene was shot in 2 locations. One was shot in my backyard. Now, if you guys don't know, my backyard is massive. I have a huge property of area. We have this huge forest land, so most of Skull Island was just shot in my backyard, like a backyard movie. But, again, all the native stuff was shot at camp. And it was intercut together pretty seamlessly, because I had to find locations that were suitable and looked like the locations where we were filming in my backyard, which was interesting. These 2 bits about talking about if Jack could speak native and the cannibal bit, these were actually improv by the actors, because I always tried to find, whenever we were shooting, hey, is there any kind of little in-jokes or a little gag you want to try here? And Brett Charles, who plays Jack, not only a great physical actor, a great action lead, but he is fucking hilarious. He's hilarious in this, behind the scenes. Really funny guy to talk to. He's always got a sense of humor on set, so he came up with a few good jokes here and there in the filming. Now, the native language, it's gibberish. I'm not gonna lie. It's very much gibberish. Jack is mostly speaking actual native because Brett Charles is Native American, or partial Native American. And the native chief, who's played by Kyle, my buddy Kyle, great guy by the way, was speaking pretty much very kind of stereotypical Jewish kind of dialogue, because when we were filming, he was asking me, what do I say? What kind of native gibberish do I try? And I just said, come up with something that just sounds savage. So he just did this whole, and it sounded savage, but I was also saying, it sounds very Jewish, and he said, I am Jewish. Well, I'm like, okay, that makes sense then. So we just stuck that into the film, and it was hilarious. I do like these little in-jokes that Brett makes as well, like, where, like, they're saying, oh, the native woman, they want her, and then slightly, Jack puts Anne behind him, which is really funny. There's one joke coming up here that I love where Jack's just like, shim shim, I don't understand your language, no. You know, he just, because I think that was actually an outtake, because, right here, this is hysterical.
Jack, can you tell him I like him too? Just not in that way. Shim shim, shim, no.
That was an outtake, because, we were just kind of, like, running out of, like, really kind of tired that day as well. So we just, basically, he just did that. I'm like, you know what? That's actually kind of funny. Let's keep that in. Now, most might know this, but the little kid with the shield is actually Jake's brother, who is the most adorable kid. But he was a great native to have on set. So yeah, a lot of this, this whole bit here was interesting because one of the things that kind of bugged me about the other films is that they just basically say, let's be friends, and that'll be it, and then they walk away, and then we had originally in the script had it where they do have this whole chase scene, but they do get back to the boat, and then the natives kidnap Anne. But what happened is that because we were trying to abridge the story, we're trying to abridge the script a bit more, we had it where let's just have Anne kidnapped on the island, and all the main sailors are killed, and Denim and Herb hide, and Jack gets knocked out. So that was something I kind of came up with while we were in the middle of production, and I figured it worked a lot better, and it kept the pace of the story to go a lot faster than going back to the boat. And it also gave me an excuse to come up with a really cool action sequence with the native chase, essentially. So, yeah, and with Jack getting knocked out, it's also based on the Peter Jackson video game, where in the game, based on the movie, Jack is knocked out by an arrow or something, and then he wakes up by the altar during the sacrifice. So that's something essentially I took note of to do in this version, because I did feel like it went faster in the story. I do like those little bits of where, like, some of the sailors were mutilated and some were just left to die. It gives the natives a very kind of cannibalistic feel to them, which I will admit, I do like to think that they are cannibals, the natives in this movie, and they come off as more savage. So, my idea is that maybe, like, some of the weaker men they'll just eat, and then, like, the females they'll offer to Kong. So, because we had our extras in a totally different location, the extra natives and the actors never really interacted with each other. So, whenever we needed natives interacting with the actors, either I would stand in or a production assistant, Kayla, would step in and would just play natives for a little bit just to pad out the timing. So, that's what we did. We just had it where we wouldn't show our faces, and we would just make it look like where we are native. So, a lot of that is me there being a native just for certain shots to add it, in later to fill in the editing. A lot of what we shot was, or a lot of what was planned in the production was pre-planned. It had animatics, it had storyboards, and so on. And in the script, there was a lot more detail, and because of that, a lot of the original cut of this movie was about 4.5 hours, and that was mostly due to the amount of padding of shots. So at some point during the editing, I had to just cut out what was not important. And there was a lot that was cut that was mostly padding. Padded shots that were kind of pointless. This bit with Denim and Herb inside the hut, this hut, along with the main shots of the actors on the wall of the island, this is all shot in my basement, because our basement has this amazing kind of wooden architecture, which comes off, and it's very old and worn looking, so I figured that would look perfect for the wall of the island whenever we needed tight shots of them there. which is interesting. A lot of the native girls are camp counselors that we had just dance for a little bit during a dance party. And then the wall here, this is a mix of the miniature walls you can see here with the lock, and then the close-ups of the natives pulling the gate open. That is shot in the gym warehouse at the summer camp. And then the natives pulling the log up close, the lock up close is actually, again, shot in the same warehouse, and it's just in a wooden wall area, and we just put a big tree log on the side of the wall. A shot like this, actually, with the natives climbing, there was a scaffolding in the gym, so we just had a couple of the counselors just climb up the scaffolding for a quick shot, and then I just matted in the bamboo fencing. I do like this shot of the gong, although I wish it did come out a little better. The gong was basically on top of the miniature wall. It was a plastic container lid that I just spray painted gold and strung up with string, and then just filmed the background plate to put on the green screen, because there was no way we could get an actual gong in the movie. A lot of these shots of, honestly, the altar and the wall, actually I think did come out pretty well. I'm actually pretty impressed with them. So there they are, you know, closing the gate again. Again, all these miniature... I will admit, like, the miniature wall is probably one of my crowning achievements on this film. I'm really proud of how it came out. And that whole miniature wall was probably shot in the span of, like, a day or two. Or actually, no, it was all shot in the day, all the miniature stuff. I woke up early in the morning to get the main established shots, and then we wrecked the shit out of it later on in the film with the Kong suit. I do like the native chief staff, by the way. I think that it's just a big, long stick painted black with a styrofoam skull and some bones on it. It came out really well. There was more to this scene. You can see them in the deleted scenes from the movie, but basically Herb would be filming and seeing Anne, and Denham would be like, just keep filming, this is a golden opportunity for us. Now, these shots of the trees are interesting. These were shot in Cancun, Mexico, because I went on vacation to Mexico for a couple of days with my family, and there was one day where we were on the top floor of the resort we were at, and the trees just started to move on their own through the wind, so I grabbed my camera and got those shots and made it look like Kong was coming through the trees. And this is all just Bradley done in the suit, and the suit, honestly, actually, I think came out pretty damn well. The way the suit came out was just basically buying a bunch of separate gorilla suit pieces and picking the best ones that looked good for the whole thing of the suit. There were arm extensions made out of cardboard tubes and added fur, as well as some official King Kong boxing gloves that we just stuck on the bottom. The mask was from a Spirit Halloween store, because they had at the time this really great animatronic gorilla mask, and where if you move your jaw, the mouth would move, and so with the jaws revealing gums. So we used that for the majority of the close-up shots of Kong. There were about 2 or 3 masks for different purposes. One had an open mouth mask, one had a closed mask, one with a stunt mask, but the main mask you see is the mechanical one we used, and it did need some modifications because we had to put in a black screen, we had to pad it where it fit Bradley's head, and I think it came out really well. This bit with Keep the Camera Rolling, that's actually a bit from the spoof Date movie, which had a credit scene at the end where they parody Kong, and the guy's like, keep the camera rolling as she's getting captured. And then all these shots are basically just the suit mixed with the full-size arm we did create for the film. Full-size hand of Kong. A lot of this stuff with Bob, played by Evan Matthews, is based on the '76 remake. And the way Bob came around was, I didn't, at the time, think about him being the Englehorn equivalent. When I was coming up with the script, we did kind of need a secondary villain, I felt, for the movie. So, one of the things I came up with, one of my favorite side villains, my favorite kind of sidekick villains, is Bob the Goon from Tim Burton's Batman. So, a lot of Bob that you see in this movie is based on the henchman that the Joker had in that film. And I made the mistake of not calling him Englehorn, and that would have been fine, but I instead called him Bob Gordon, based on Charles Gordon from the '76 remake. And there's a whole backstory, too, about this, where, like, Bob is actually the son of Englehorn, the head of the corporation, and I like the idea that the dad essentially disowned his son and put him on board a kind of a messed up oil tanker ship or research vessel, And then he's thinking, oh, you know, am I going to be captain? It's like, no, you're going to be running by this guy named Jack. And I think that's why he's so quick to put him on a mutiny, because he wants some kind of recognition from his father. He wants some sort of, you know, form of command and power. These shots, again, shot in my basement, and we had a green screen on hand, and I actually composited it with the miniature wall, and the shots with just denim facing the camera. These shots here, I love these. These came out surprisingly really well. I'm really impressed how that came out. Now, at this point, there is a lot taken from the 96 draft. There's a bit coming up where, you know, before they take off into the jungle, Jack grabs Denham's arm and says, you know, we're trying to save Ant and not make a goddamn movie, and the whole dialogue between them. That was right out of the 96 draft, which I really enjoyed reading it the first time around. The prop guns were mostly bought at discount liquidation stores and dollar stores, and that's why they do look how they do. The the original concept for them having the guns, the certain types, they would have, obviously, 9mm handguns. They would have pump-action shotguns, but the guns we were originally going to have were AK-47s, and I was going to buy a bunch of Halloween prop-based AK-47s. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any on time of production, so I just quickly grabbed some ones at the dollar store, which were these water guns that looked like M16s, and they worked pretty good. We bought maybe about 10 or 20 of them, and they last throughout the entire production, and a lot of them broke, a lot of them just kind of completely got messed up. And what was interesting about those prop guns is that they had, obviously, the water canister, and instead of wasting the canisters, I used them to make the gas bombs, or the gas grenades, as we put it. And all I did was just spray paint them silver and just put in explosive on the side of them, and they came out pretty well. So, nice use of recycled filmmaking there. So, I love also the case with the gas bombs. It was from an old Super 8mm camera that had this really nice brown leather case with it, and I just felt it looked perfect for the gas bombs. Now, here we are. We're going into the jungles of Skull Island, and here we have, you know, our main set of actors going in. And all of Skull Island, the entire jungle of Skull Island, was shot in my backyard. Now, I have a couple of acres of land where I live, and just this beautiful forest with all these different cool-looking locations. So when I was doing location scouting, we were thinking we'd go to, like, a public park or something, but I figured, why not shoot it in the raw forest to make it look more authentic? And that's what we did. We spent 2 or 3 years out in the woods just filming this movie, from, like, the swamp, the forest jungle scene here, the glades, the stampede scene, were all shot in my backyard. And it's a beautiful property, and we just had a lot of fun shooting all this stuff. There's a lot of great locations where we filmed this. So a lot of this brush stuff was shot pretty much right at the end of where my dad would usually mow the grass. And this is out kind of in a area where my dad would just dump all the cut grass all in this kind of like sand pit, or this kind of like dumping ground, like, what do you call it, landfill, where you put all your like rotten like plants and stuff. So we shot it there, most of the brush. Now this footprint was actually shot right at the edge of the area where we shot the pinnacles of the Brontosaurus Stampede. We only made one footprint. Well, technically we made two, but one was out in the woods and wasn't really used, essentially. But this one we used the same footprint for this scene and later on for the Bronto Stampede. And that footprint, actually, I had to take kind of like a concept of, I had to come up with what gorilla footprints look like, and I took a day to just dig that thing up, and because every time we went back and filmed it, it constantly grew weeds and grass, so every other time we had to go back and film it, I would have to take a weed whacker and just cut off all the edges and stomp it down to make it look like it was a fresh footprint. And here we are with the dinosaurs. Of course, one of the most iconic things in King Kong is you can't do it without dinosaurs. Even the 76 film, which I love, I am kind of bummed they never used dinosaurs. And all these dinosaur figures were all stop motion that I did myself. After having experience doing a ton of Lego movies, I did get a real talent in doing stop motion, so I just spent maybe about a month worth of days just doing this animation for all the dinosaurs. And the Stegosaurus, all the dinosaurs were made out of, basically, the main core of it was plasticine. Plasticine, which, after high school, before I left high school, I actually took advantage of my art class, and they were throwing out all this plasticine from all these previous claymation films that the students had to do. And I just took all this plasticine, I had pounds and pounds of the stuff, and I just sculpted my own dinosaurs. A lot of the early concept for the dinosaurs were actually, a friend of mine drew these amazing sketches, so I just basically took influence from that. And another person I took a lot of advice from was Fred the Dinosaur Man, who does these amazing claymation dinosaur shorts on YouTube, and he was a real help in, like, helping me decide how to sculpt these creatures, so thank you so much, Fred. I love that shot of the rope wrapping around the tail. The rope is just basically some yellow pipe cleaner wire that we just kind of added, and it came out really well. The miniature trees also were mostly just, you know, branches and rocks and stuff, but a lot of the big trees were actually from the Ewok playset from Return of the Jedi, because I have a ton of old Kenner toys in my attic, and I have the Ewok playset, so we just took it apart and we just added to make it look like these massive trees, and they came out pretty well. The Stegosaurus, so it was basically obviously sculpted in plasticine. The spikes were actually from these Crayola molding plaster that I just made the spikes out of, and then put them on top of toothpicks and stuck them into the character and patted around with the plasticine. The beak of the Stegosaurus was actually a plastic parrot beak that I cut out and I painted, and the spikes at the end were from these beaded, kind of looking sharp teeth looking horn things, and I just stuck those on the back as the spiked tail, and that came out pretty well. The majority of the sounds for the Stegosaur were actually low-pitched elephant roars. Most people, when they think elephant sounds, they think of the trumpeting, but there are a couple of clips out there on YouTube of elephants legitimately roaring, and it actually is pretty terrifying, but in order to make it not be so distinctive to said elephant, I actually just essentially pitched it way down. And I'll get into more of the sound effects later. The camp scene was, this was shot in an area where there were all these kind of, out in the woods, these kind of busted down trees from windstorms and stuff that had been down for decades, and we saw these trees and they looked like something Kong would have smashed into. So we took advantage of that and just had it where they make break at this camp area. Now, where Bob's at, this is all in my main backyard, and what happened was the reason we were able to have the tents up was because at the time, my mom had, a couple days, a week prior, had done a baby shower for a family member. And because these tents were up, I thought this would be a great place to have Bob's camp area in the native village. So I asked my mom if she could keep it up for a week so I could film this, and thankfully she did. And we basically shot that in the day with the cast and crew, where Bob is just basically at his campsite. Funny enough, we didn't have walkie-talkies on set, so we had these fake plastic ones. But we also had, you know, these little kind of, like, old phones and stuff that worked as well. Now, Hyde is obviously named after the infamous Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I figured that was a funny little gag. He's essentially the Roy Bagley of the movie from the '76 remake, and played by Jacob Colley, who did a wonderful job not only as Hyde, but as a bunch of other sailors and stuff in the background. Now, this transition shot here is interesting because this was, the sunrise was actually a sunset in again, Cancun, Mexico. I got a lot of establishing shots in Mexico because the jungles there are spectacular, and I basically reversed the shot and got a perfect sunrise. The stuff with Anne in the cave and stuff later on, any kind of cavern locations we filmed in were shot in a rock climbing facility in my local town, and we basically got permission for them to film in a rock climbing facility for any kind of cavern stuff. Now here in this kind of, in the original script, there was a whole thing where, like, this is supposed to be an abandoned ancient temple purely made out of gold. There was this whole golden temple area, and it's sort of where Kong has this kind of rendezvous point. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to do any kind of miniatures with a golden temple, so we basically abandoned that concept, and it's more just based on the '76 film where she's in a glade. But they are on kind of a cliff area of the island. I love these shots of Kong composited with Anne herself. Now, yes, we did build a full-scale hand rig for Kong, and the way that came around was the main source of the hand was actually a Halloween costume where they did make this sort of King Kong hand with Anne's dress where a girl could wear this thing and be like, hey, I'm Fay Ray, save me. And we bought this, we bought the hand costume for about $75, and then we wanted to make it larger, so we basically had a whole arm rigged from basically the palm to the elbow, constructed out of a plywood frame, basically a wooden frame. We also built the skeletal of the arm so we can make it move better, and the arm was made out of flat wood, and the fingers were foam, pool noodle foam that we glued on and taped on. And then we padded it with the main source of the arm with a bed foam, which we bought at Walmart, and then wrapped the whole thing in black fur and sewed it all together, and that's how you got the hand there. And the hand also had basically this kind of technology where an actor would two people would lift the hand up, because this thing was heavy to have on set. And then another person would have a fishing line that was sewed and fed through the vein of the hands and around the fingers, so when you pull the string, the fingers would move. And when we were filming, it lasted for about 3 days, and the whole fucking string snapped. And for the rest of filming, we just had it where it kind of was mostly limp, and we tried to make it move as much as we could through arm movement. But it worked as much as we could on that one. Now, the hand was mostly used for green screen shots, so this is all Sylvana on a green screen, pretty much interacting with nothing. And it was really difficult for her because she had to get her eye line right, so what we'd do is on the green screen, we would take some painter's tape and mark where Kong's eye line would be so she could have something to look at. And it really helped her out, and we also had somebody there being Kong occasionally just to kind of give that interaction to get her to act a bit better. Now, Sylvana had never acted really anything, so she really tried her hardest to give it that emotion, and a lot of it came out pretty genuine. And obviously you have, like, shots of Kong placed as a background plate, and then the hand added in later on green screen. This was really a test film to kind of figure out how we would do proper compositing. It was really an experimental film, and I think a lot of what we were testing at the time to get the shots and everything really helped out for later productions to get good green screen effects. Now, this was interesting because we had this whole scene where Anne would get all muddy and dirty, and thankfully, the day we shot this scene, there was already a huge rainstorm, so everything downhill was pretty much completely muddy and soggy on kind of swamp grounds. So I asked Sylvana if you wanted to just do the scene where you just run into a puddle of mud, and I was afraid she would say no, but thankfully she was like, you know what? Yeah, fuck it, I'll do it. So we did about 3 takes of her just running in the mud, and then a bit of her just kind of struggling, and filmed it with the hand. That was great. And here we have the Brontosaurus Stampede, the upcoming Brontosaurus Stampede in this valley. Now, this whole valley, again, is shot near my place, downhill. And there's this whole widened kind of track area where a lot of the ETVs go, and it just looked really good for the sequence. And it looks pretty kind of wide in angle and scale, so we used that for the majority of the Stampede. Now, this bit with the Ankylosaur, this is right out of the 96 draft. All the dialogue that's presented when they're throwing stones at the Ankylosaur. All this was a concept from 96 when Denham needs to film some extra stuff. So, in the original draft that we wrote, we took from the 96 script, and we had a scene that was cut out of the film where after Denham says, people are going to think it's a guy in a suit, he would turn around and say, hey guys, I got a great idea. Why don't we turn this whole island into an amusement park, sort of a Coney Island with dinosaurs? It'll be a gold mine. I'll cut you in for 20%. That was basically a nod, obviously, to Jurassic Park. Now, but what's interesting is that there's this whole conflict between Denham and Jack, and especially Bob, on leadership of the crew, because neither characters trust each other. And we basically have this whole thing going on while Denham and Jack are in the jungle. They are struggling for leadership because Jack is determined to get Anne, while Denham's more concerned about making his movie. And this dialogue here was actually taken from the 96, or from the 76 movie where Jeff Bridges contacts Bob and says, you know, there's a girl out there who's running from her life from some gigantic turned-on ape. Now, I love this whole earthquake sequence. This came out really well. These shots of the rocks, I would be below a hill, and I would just have a couple of our actors just throw some rocks below me. And there were a couple times I actually did get hit with the camera, but thankfully the camera survived, which is great. I do like this joke, this whole joke of Herb, film what's going on. That was an improv from Jake, which was really funny. Now, here we have the Stampede, and these shots were probably some of the most difficult to composite all together because there was so much compositing that a lot of times when I'm doing it, my computer would constantly crash because of the amount of info going into the process of these shots. And the majority of this sequence was shot, again, like mostly at camp with a whole bunch of extras running, which thankfully Jake was there for shooting, as well as down in the valley, as well as mostly green screen. There was a lot of green screen filming in this. And there was just a lot of running. A lot of the actors did complain about the running, but I felt like it overall came out pretty well. Now, one thing you'll notice is that, yes, there are Carnotaurs in this sequence, because this is mostly based on the Peter Jackson film. And in the Peter Jackson movie, they had these raptor-like characters that were chasing them. But in the '96 draft, it was labeled to be Carnotauruses. And Carnotauruses are basically bull T-Rexes. But I wanted to make them essentially raptor-sized bull T-Rexes to give something a bit more unique and interesting to the predators on this island. So, yeah, we have this whole bit where they're chased by these Carnotaurs, and the Carnotaur Puppet is essentially the same thing as the others. There's a plaster scene main sculpture. The teeth are actually toothpicks, as well as the spikes on the edges, and the horns are the same as the Stegosaur. Now, you may notice, yeah, it did, the Carnotaur Puppet did have a rod sticking out of it, because I had to make all these puppets for the scene run in place, and just add them in later. Like, the Brontosaurus puppets were basically built at a very small scale, but enough where you can make them look big enough on camera. Now, I do love this whole hill climbing scene, and I think this actually came out really well. And this was actually shot on a hill on my house, because, like, the way you get down to the woodland areas, you have to go down this track, and there's this huge hill, very steep, and I figured that would actually come out really well for the movie. So we filmed this whole bit where they just kept climbing up this steep hill, and it came out really well. Now, something most people may not know is that each sailor has a name. I can't remember the name of this one, but we had a backstory for almost every one of these characters and how we had to figure out who dies and when. So this guy is essentially, I think that's, I believe, Hawkins, we call him, Jim Hawkins, which is a nod to Treasure Island. And even Zach, who plays the cabin boy, the red shirt, is named Jimmy, based on the 2005 film. This actor was great. I can't remember who he was, but this guy was great because I was telling him you're going to have this really grisly death, and he was really getting into it. So we shot that at summer camp, and he had a ball shooting that death scene. And I love this whole bit here with Herb. It was meant to be more of a struggle, but unfortunately Bradley couldn't just do that much physical acting at the time, so we really tried our best to kind of cut corners and tighten it up to make it look like it was a very intense scene. And I do like these shots of him and the Carnotaurs actually came out pretty well. And the Carnotaurs they were all the same puppet, but what I did was color time it where they all had a different distinct color, which I think made them stand out a bit more, that they had separate colors. Now, we wanted a whole bit where he tosses a boulder, but I did like the idea that Jack would essentially toss one rock, and that would cause sort of a rock avalanche, making the Carnotaurs essentially just get crushed. And here we are on the swamp scene. Now, the swamp scene's interesting because there's a whole pond down where I live in the forest. There's this huge pond, and it was essentially also mostly covered by a beaver dam because there's a bunch of beavers that cut down the trees there. So we essentially just shot this all in this whole swamp scene in a pond, and it used to be an area where a lot of kids used to swim back in old days. Where that little stretch of gunk is, there used to be an old swimming dock. And that was the majority of, it was just left abandoned, so we just used it for the majority of shooting. In fact, this whole area used to be farmland. This whole area used to be farmland until it was overgrown and abandoned. Now, I do like this whole bit of them building the raft, I'm not going to lie, but that is not the actual raft we had on shooting, and I'll get to that later on. But we just had to have a stand-in raft to make it look like they were building it from scratch. Now, this shot of Denham sitting down and having a bottle of water, that was the first shot we ever had on principal photography back in May 2011. Was this whole sequence. This was the first scene we shot. and it came out pretty well. I was very impressed with the first day. It took a couple of takes to get used to things, but the actors really improved over time. And what I love, too, is that Denham has this kind of raspy, kind of exhausted, frustrated voice. And that was because the first day we were shooting, Jake had a really bad cold and a bad kind of cough. So it came in really handy when he needed to sound all gruff and frustrated. So thank goodness for that cough. Of course, we have this is the Waterful Sequence. Now, this was mostly based on the 76 remake, because this is one of my favorite scenes in the 76 film. These background shots of the waterfalls were actually filmed at Universal Studios. For a couple of years, I did take trips to Orlando and mostly spent my time at Universal more than I would Disneyland. And I figured I'd bring my camera along, and I just thought, hey, there's these great little waterfalls. Why don't I use these as the background plates? So a lot of these background plates of the waterfalls were shot in the Jurassic Park area of Universal Orlando. And I just filmed about maybe 5-6 minutes worth of waterfall footage per shot and just composite them into the scene later. And a lot of, the majority of Kong on all fours, the forearms were, again, built out of cardboard tubes with fur attached, as well as these King Kong fists that were a toy from the 2005 film that I stuck on there as well. And I really wanted to get Kong on all fours, and I'm really glad how those came out. We did have a Barbie doll on hand that matched Sylvana's costume, and we just filmed that for any of the wide shots of Kong holding Anne. This green screen, most of the green screen, half of it was shot in my garage, and halfway through shooting, a lot of the lighting came out really bad. So when we came back to shoot more green screen elements, we actually found it was better to shoot all the green screen stuff outside on a sunny day. So what we would do is we would pin up this 10 by 25 foot green screen we built. We'd pin it with thumbtacks onto my back porch, which is a huge back porch, and pin it up and just shoot all the green screen stuff there, or that or my garage door. And that, I think overall those shots came out better than anything inside the garage. As you can see, Kong is getting more attached to Anne. The majority of Kong's sounds was actually real gorilla roars, but also, to give it more sympathy, is a little secret sound that I'll get later into a documentary about how I got the sounds for Kong's sympathy, so. Now, the rafts for the swamp scene are interesting. They were essentially, obviously made to actually be something the actors could be practical with in the water. We built the raft, we only had one raft, and we built it out of a 10-foot skid, and we needed something to float on, and originally I was going to use those big water jugs for water drinks and put them underneath, but thankfully at the time we were constructing, my neighbor was throwing out his hot tub lids, and the hot tub lids are these thick pieces of styrofoam. So we cut them, but we took the hot tub lid and we cut it in half and put one on the top and one on the bottom and screwed them on the skid. And then for a whole day we had it docked and pretty much put into the water and it floated perfectly. And then I added a bunch of wooden logs and stuff to give it more of that authentic kind of made from scratch feel. Now, unfortunately, when we were shooting, we had to get 5 or 6 actors on per raft, and once they got on, it started to sink because of the weight, and they were really freaking out, so I had to kind of guide them a few times, how to row the raft, how to go across, and unfortunately Eric Hauser, one of our sailor actors, fell in, and he lost his glasses, and I could tell he probably wanted to kill me, but he was a very good sport at it at the end of the day, and his glasses are still in that pond, by the way. But that was kind of a very kind of tense day. I will admit, probably the swamp scene was probably the most tense day of shooting because we had no lifeguards, we had no floaty things, and if any of the actors fell in and couldn't get out, we'd be dead. Now, the Parasaurolophus, a lot of this was based on the Bull Goldman 1975 script from Universal as a replacement for the Brontosaur in the swamp scene. And I wanted to the original concept was to have actually an elasmosaur, and then it was later changed to a Carnotaur, and then just a swamp monster, until finally we decided on a Parasaurolophus, because it would be not only a homage to the Bo Goldman script, but also just a little easier. And the majority of the creature is actually a hand puppet from the Lost World toy line that I bought on eBay, and we basically filmed a whole day of me just in this mucky swamp with a bunch of G.I. Joe figures for the characters getting eaten. And that's how a lot of those shots came out, was through hand puppet. This scene was shot multiple times, mostly because the original version had Herb lose the camera in the mouth and then go into the mouth and try to get the camera out, and then get eaten. But unfortunately, we didn't have time to build kind of the interior of the creature's mouth, so we just shot it where they have this, where Denim and Herb have this struggle, and then they, you know, essentially, you know, he gets eaten. The Herb figure in that shot was actually an Elizabeth Swann action figure from the Pirates movies that I just kind of took the head off and stuck in the puppet's mouth, which is interesting. Now, originally, in this sequence, there was a whole bit where, you know, Denim says, I'm going to dedicate this to Herb Cooper, but then breaks and says, that's a wrap. Now, it's at this point you start to realize that Denim is more of kind of just a very manipulative slime ball. And it's at this point, too, where the audience just hates him. And I love, the first time we had the premiere of this movie, and when Jake said the line, well, that's a wrap, let's head to the ship, there was this very eerie kind of feeling in the theater like, oh, you dickhole. So that was something that was kind of really fun to look at. Now, this fist fight scene, this was in the script early on, because when I write my scripts, this is a little tip for any screenwriters, I write to music, and what I usually do is I have a bunch of soundtracks from all these films, and I would take my favorite pieces and come up with concepts and ideas, and edit the movie down as a soundtrack, and then write from there. So when I was writing this fight sequence, it came out of this track from Disney's Dinosaur, where Aladar fights Crone, and I figured that would be a good key point in the movie to have these two get into a fist fight. So I wrote it, we shot it, and a lot of it was improvised as well. I just kind of said to the Brett and Jake, we're just going to make up this fight as we go along, but it's going to end with Jake kicking Brett in the nuts. So thankfully, one of our sailor guys, Hartley, is an expert at fist fighting and like kind of street fighting. So he was able to come up with something very quick to choreograph. We took a half-hour break and then went out and choreographed this fight scene. And we just let the cameras roll and just picked the best pieces and spliced it into the cut. Now that whole bit of Jack taking off and the dialogue there was actually based on The Land Before Time. There's a whole scene where Sarah and Littlefoot get into a fight and then the crew split off. And that was based on The Land Before Time, that whole scene in the fight and when Jack takes off. Now, here we have, coming up, the Baby Triceratops. The Baby Triceratops, this was an interesting, figuring out how the hell we were going to film this. It was originally supposed to be a stop-motion Baby Triceratops, which I had sculpted. But I figured to give it more, make it more practical and more better for the actors, we shot this whole bit where we bought a Coda Triceratops toy, and Coda is this big, full-scale animatronic Baby Triceratops for kids. So I bought one off Kijiji, and we used it for filming, and it was perfect, because for Evan, it gave him something to interact with, which was great, and give it more of a realistic feel to it. And then, essentially, afterwards, after we finished filming, we sold the animatronic, and we used the rest of the money to pay for more of the production. Now, a lot of this stuff with the Triceratops was, again, from the 96 draft, where one of the concepts was a sailor would shoot a baby Triceratops, and a pack of bull trikes would get mad and chase after them. Another one had it where Denim would step into a nest of them and crush the eggs, and that would get the Triceratopses pissed off as well. But I figured I'd go with the latter and have it where Peak here, the sailor here, actually shoots the trike in the face. The baby trike. I do like this shot coming up. This was just basically Evan running on a green screen, and then it would immediately cut to him as a G.I. Joe. Now, G.I. Joes are great for miniature characters, for miniature people, for any production, especially if you're doing stop motion. And what I did was I found this one G.I. Joe figure that was gray and looked like Evan a bit, and I had to modify him, paint him, but then I had to screw a hole in them. And the problem with G.I. Joe figures is that they are very loose, so if you fuck it up once, you're going to break the figure. So thankfully I had to carefully screw a hole into this trike that would be big enough for the Triceratops puppet. Now the puppet themselves of the Triceratops is the same way all the other ones, sculpted, the toothpicks on the back, but what's a key interesting point is the horns. And the horns are actually made from chicken bones. Chicken bones always come in handy for horns and stuff, for miniature puppets, so if you're ever eating chicken wings, guys, or having a chicken, just save the bones, wash them, decontaminate them, and use them for your puppets, and they come out really well. And I do like that little extra detail. That was pretty much unintentional, of the blood stain on one of the horns. Now, here we have the upcoming log sequence. Now, the log sequence was interesting because we did obviously need a full-scale tree for them to go over and go across. Down where I'm a few miles off from the woods where I'm at, there's this huge creek. And the creek looked big enough for a log sequence, I'm not gonna lie, for the chasm. And the original idea was that we were gonna actually chop down a tree and make it where the actors go across. But unfortunately that didn't work out too well, and we had to come up with another plan. So thankfully, when I was doing location scouting about a year or two in advance, we had this huge windstorm, and this windstorm, afterwards, I went down to the woods to check the area out, and there was this massive tree that fell over from the roots, and so I picked that location, and we used it for the majority of the log scene. So this was actually a tree that got knocked down during a storm, and we just used it for the log. We just had to make sure not to shoot the bottom because there was no chasm underneath the actors. This was also probably the second day we started the behind-the-scenes videos that Bradley did on the channel, which is pretty cool. So thankfully we had all 5 actors on hand for this shoot, and it was great. Now, the reason the quality of film is different here than in the rest of the movie is because when we were filming the sequence, about a quarter way through shooting, our battery died on the camera. And normally when your battery dies, you have to have a backup camera. So we had a DVD camera, a mini DVD camera, as well as a mini VHS camera. And yes, they're primitive, but if you're kind of out of options, it's the only way to shoot this stuff. So we filmed on this VHS cam, and I just had to incorporate the footage onto my computer. So the majority of Kong shaking the log is actually shot in that creek where we're originally going to shoot. So while we didn't use it for the full sequence, it actually came out better that we used it for the miniature log chasm. And all we did was we had to find a really nice rotten log out in the woods, and we put it across the chasm. I would set little G.I. Joe figures on the log. And by the way, I love this shot. This is one of my favorite shots that came out. It's just the compositing is perfect. That wide shot of the sailors. So, yeah, we would have G.I. Joe figures on the rotten log, and Bradley, as the actor of Kong, would just shake the thing and shake all the figures off, and then we would reset and do it again until we got all the shots. So, a lot of that came out pretty damn well, I'm not gonna lie. It came out pretty impressive. I do like those shots of the actors falling. They look cheap, but they're fun. Now, this camera, this is one of the prop cameras that got destroyed. We had it where we had to make it drop on the log set, and then the bit where it falls was actually shot at summer camp. There's this big kind of rock cliff area, so I braved the elements, we set up the cameras, I braved the elements, took the camera up this steep cliff. I could have fallen and cracked my rib, and I just dropped the camera, and we had it where it completely smashed. It came out, we think we did about 2 or 3 takes of me, I had to climb up that thing constantly, and that's how they came out. A lot of the sailors falling and landing, that was also the same areas where we shot the destroyed camera. And all I had was some Ken dolls, some Barbie Ken dolls that had loose limbs, and we just dropped them, and that's how they got the impact there. Now, there's great symbolism here, because the last sailor to be on the log is actually Bradley, who plays Kong. So Kong is essentially killing himself. How poetic. Now, I love this scene, the spider pit scene. It's very brief, but it works, and a lot of what we were originally going to do was basically go to a pet store and shoot tarantulas on green screens and a miniature kind of fish tank with this rock area without the water. But unfortunately, we didn't have time to really get the scorpions and stuff, and plus the pet owner said that they weren't behaving properly. They wouldn't do really what we did. So a lot of the footage you see here of the scorpions are CG, really the only CG in the film. But a lot of the spiders and stuff are actually National Geographic footage that I was able to take out some of the backgrounds and add into my own. Especially this shot. That's a great shot right there. And it's great too, because a lot of audience members freak out in that sequence, which is great. I also did have to explain where the trike went, and he just kind of laughed, and that was something obviously from the original where you always wonder why the hell they don't just go back, not only just because of the force of Kong, but also the fact that the Triceratops is there, so it kind of gave a good point in the plot elements. These shots were difficult because of Jack in the miniature Jack in the Cave, because we shot it on the creek, and I knew exactly where to put I put a little green screen on, a little dug-in hole on the side of the creek, and then just added the shot in later and matted it. And here we come to the T-Rex fight, one of the most iconic moments in any Kong film. The T-Rex suit was interesting because at the time we were prepping it, the Jurassic Park inflatable T-Rex costume had not come out yet, but I wanted to go for an actual legit costume. So a lot of the T-Rex suit, the main core of the suit is actually a Amazing Spider-Man lizard costume, Halloween costume. The hands are from a Star Wars lizard character costume, and the feet are actually just slippers. Now, the mask, we had two masks for the T-Rex. One was a mechanical mask made out of a bicycle helmet with light wood, chicken wire, and fabric that was put over it. And then the stunt head, which was basically made out of bed foam that I just sculpted all the pieces and put together. And this whole fight scene, this is interesting. This was shot in the summer of 2015 for a very hot 2 days of shooting, and God bless the actors who were in the suits, having to spend the whole day fighting in these hot, sweaty suits in the middle of the summer. But I think it actually came out pretty damn well, this whole fight scene. And most of it was storyboarded, and it went a lot longer than usual, but we obviously had to cut it down. But some of it was also improvised, because I just said, just go and fight, and they just went at it. There's one great blooper, by the way, where, like, Bradley is in the suit, and he's trying to push the Rex back, and the Rex is supposed to push him down and then lunge forward at him, but the actor in the T-Rex suit took the initiative to basically lunge his whole body onto Bradley, and Bradley had his knees up, and when the actor landed on him, his knees kind of just gave in, and Bradley just, like, said a pretty foul word. I won't say what he said, but he was like, "Ah, you fucking," you know, and basically we were laughing for the rest of the day because that was, like, the funniest thing to hear Bradley say. The majority of the T-Rex sounds were actually one of my favorite stock dinosaur sounds, which is what's known as a dragon roar. And the roar was used in several films, Land Before Time, Power Rangers for the Dragon Zord, and a few other projects, but it's always been one of my favorite sound effects, this classic dragon roar, so I combined it with the T-Rex roar from Jurassic Park, as well as gator sounds for the majority of the T-Rex roars. And again, Kong's roar was mostly legit gorilla roars pitched way down, and it's really hard to find actual gorilla sounds because the roars are mostly shrieks, but there's a couple out there, like the male gorillas, that will actually live out a legit roar, and it's pretty scary, but we had to pitch it way low and lengthen it to make it sound better. Now, this is obviously a great moment to have the jaw ripping, and after we did the jaw rip, that mechanical mask was done. That was shot on basically the last bit of shooting on those 2 days of the T-Rex fight, and we just had the actor laid down, and the way we did this shot is we had the T-Rex actor have a mix of Kool-Aid, red Kool-Aid, and corn syrup and water, and he would, like, drink it, hold it in his mouth, and we would do the scene, and when I would say 3, 2, 1, he would spray it out like a fountain, and it came out pretty damn well, but man, afterwards it was so sticky that we had to essentially get rid of that whole mask afterwards. But it always gets the best cheer from the audience, I find. It comes out pretty authentic. Now, the whole thing here with Anne basically being wounded is that she does land on sort of, I would want to say, like, a kind of diseased log with a sharp kind of thorn area, and that's how she gets the cut on her leg. And so because of the bacteria and stuff, she is essentially going into kind of an unconscious level, which gives Kong more of an urgency to get to the top of the mountain. And we wrote in a whole thing where, like, he has these flower petals that essentially are able to heal. These certain flower herbs that you take the petals and mix them with, like, a water. They have sort of a medical effect where they'll heal the leg incredibly fast. It's very brief, but it is touched upon in the film. Now here you have Denham and Jack separated between the chasm, basically discussing what to do next. These were shot in the span of different months. So, you know, there's one bit where we shot all of Jake's coverage and then filmed Brett on green screen, and then another where we shot all of Brett's coverage and filmed Jake on green screen. And actually, this shot of Jack throwing the gun, it was all done in one take, thankfully. It was just one take, and it said, that's perfect, let's move on. So I did like how that came out. He actually did catch the gun. So it is also meant to show that, like, when Denham, we do see more of what Denham does when he does get back to the wall, because in the other films it's very brief. It's very not really well shown, so I do like the concept where he basically is scheming up a way to capture Kong, and he essentially does lie about Jack and Ann essentially being dead so he can get the crew to follow him. This was also a day where we just shot Jake just running through the woods. That was a fun day. There's a lot of coverage of that. Now, it's interesting how, like, with Skull Island, we try to get an idea that, like, the seasons change depending on where you go. So, when you're outside of the island and it's foggy, it's a bit more cold because of the fog. But most of the fog is, like, a hot steam. And then, when you go to the more of the native side of the wall, it's more fall, more deserty, not much plant life. But then once you get to the core of the island, it is more of a tropical jungle. We were trying to go for that kind of seasonal feel. So whenever we needed to shoot in the village, we'd shoot it in the fall or spring. Whenever we needed to shoot in the main core of the island, we'd shoot it in the summer. And then anything with the fog would essentially be in the winter on the ship. This bit is obviously from the '76 remake, where they explain that the oil is not really worth anything. We did have a joke on the set that actually made it into my review where, one take, Jacob was like, oh, the test results are in, and he says, you are not the father, as a nod to Maury Povich. So we were making that joke constantly on set when we were shooting this sequence. Now, when we did this scene, the thing is, what I love about Evan as an actor, he's very unpredictable in what he's going to do. And when I told him how you basically need to kind of realize that you're completely screwed with this oil thing, it's a bust, and you put your whole investment into it. So he just came up with this, just a couple of takes of him doing different reactions to what happened, and I did like the one where he flips out the most and just throws his hat. Now we're back to the basement set of the wall. I will admit there is some continuity problems with this film, mostly in, like, hairdos and occasionally Evan wearing different set of pants, depending on the day. So a joke we made here, like, one time, where Evan says this. When he says, where's Ann, we would reply with, where are my pants? Which is pretty funny. So that whole bit of Denham saying that that Jack and Ann perished was, again, from the '96 draft that Jackson wrote to make, you know, Denham more of a scumbag. And a lot of this is just basically the two villains coming to terms of what they need and teaming up and forming an alliance to take Kong out. And yeah, we wrote this whole bit where, wait, how are they going to get Kong if Ann's not around? So we wrote this whole thing where their scheme would be they would set a rig way to capture Kong, but get the natives to basically perform this sacrifice in order to lure Kong in. Meanwhile, Bob and his sailors would capture Kong through hooks and everything and nets, as well as the chloroform grenades, and then Denham would just be filming the whole thing as part of his film to not... Because I always imagine, like, yes, Denham had the core footage in his camera in the jungle, but he did obviously have a couple of backup cameras on standby. So, yeah, here we just... And the whole thing is, there is a bit of symbolism about, you know, colonization and slavery with the natives and stuff. And that all made it in the original draft, but it's very subtle now, more in the film without being spoken. Of course, you gotta do the classic villain handshake. Jake and Evan, when they were shooting this scene, were having a ball, just playing these dastardly villains. So... a lot of people wonder, like, how many sailors went on this thing? And in the original film, the dock watcher says, you know, there's 3 times more than the ship needs, and how do they have room enough to sleep? And from my assumption, the Venture always had a maybe, like, the main crew of a ship like that would be probably about 15, 20. So when they say 3 times more, I imagine more about like 30, 35 sailors in total, and half of them mostly perished through the rescue party. So there's still about 15 left. So you could still technically capture Kong with 15 men, I like to think. Now, there was a whole scene in between this bit where Kong is going to the mountain where he was going to go across a river and fight a Carnotaurs in this river. There's a part of me that wants to shoot that scene at some point, but I doubt it. But it was a concept we had, but obviously because the film was, like, getting way too long, we obviously had to cut it early in production, and also because we didn't know how to shoot it, because we couldn't find a big Carnosaurus-like figure to use, so that scene was essentially dropped. Brett was, I'll be honest, Brett is probably a great physical actor. He really gave all into the action scenes, and he just had a blast doing it. So a lot of this was just him climbing a very steep hill down where we're in the backyard. These shots of Kong, I did bring the suit one time to summer camp and just took advantage of a lot of the rock formations they had, so I used that in one. This is a shot from summer camp. And once we get into Kong's cave, this is again shot at a local rock climbing facility called Rock and Shock. And we shot this whole sequence there in about a day, and we filmed it in the small little smaller creviced area that not many of the rock climbing facilities use. So we asked them if we could use it, and they said, yeah, sure, and that's what we ended up doing. Obviously, we couldn't have a fog machine in the set because it would have caused a fire alarm, so a lot of the smoke added here, the steam from the volcanic vents, as I put it, were mostly added in later in post-production. Now, these are the flowers that Kong would use to essentially heal Anne. Now, this snake fight, I mean, I kind of really wanted to do this snake fight, and I know the plush is a little bit goofy looking, essentially. But what we were trying to do was find a legit fake python snake. And unfortunately, at the time we had to get to shooting, there was nothing. Now, the snake is actually 2 stuffed snakes. One I found at a local thrift shop, which came out pretty well and I modified. But the other, for more wide shots, right here, is actually one I won at a arcade. When I went to the movies one time with a couple of friends, and we were, like, shooting the shit for a while before a movie, and there was this massive 10-foot stuffed snake that they had displayed as one of the prizes. So we were able to find one of the arcade machines that everybody knew how to play the game and win hundreds of tickets, and that was completely rigged. So we beat that game a couple of times, and we won the snake. So I think that was about a total of about $20 worth of credits to use in the arcade machines to win that. Now, this scene is obviously out of the 33 and 76 remake, and in the older movies, it's meant to be more of just kind of like this thing that Cooper originally had, where it's just more of goes back to when he was a child reading Paul Duchalou's Equatorial Africa and hearing stories about gorillas that would attack villagers and drag women and children out into the jungle doing God knows what. And obviously that made it into the 33 film as more of a kind of a charming, cute little scene. But as of late now, you see that in the 76 remake, and a lot of people see it as a creepy kind of partial rape of sorts. Now, obviously I wanted to kind of do that in this remake, but the thing is that I didn't want it to come off as a partial rape. So what I essentially did was I basically wrote it in where he's basically trying to find the source of the wound, of where to get it where it won't be like painful for Anne. So the whole thing is we write in where it's just when he's ripping her clothes off, he's just curious, essentially, you know, about this fabric she's wearing. So it was very, very also very difficult to shoot the scene, especially for Sylvana, the actress. And obviously she was very consensual about the whole thing, and essentially, you know, just wanted what she wanted, and we gave her what she wanted. So that's how that scene came out. So yeah, we write this whole thing where the flowers essentially do heal people quickly, and it's one of the sources of the island. So it's like, forget the oil, the flower power is where it's at. But we do write it in where, like, we wanted to make Kong a lot more sympathetic in some respects. So he's doing this obviously to save Anne's life from this wound, But to Anne, when she sees herself a bit more without her shirt, she sees it as the ape being a complete creepo, and it's this complete misunderstanding of judgment between these two characters, and it does make Kong a bit more sympathetic that he wasn't doing this out of a creepy factor, he was doing it to save her life. So it does kind of make him more sympathetic. And then you have Anne here, Sylvana punching the hand of the mechanical hand. That's when it was completely went limp because of the wire and it snapped, so we had to make it look like it was moving. Bradley in the costume there going uphill. I think in that take he actually did kind of fall over into like a bush area and was like, oh crap, right? So a lot of people did occasionally get hurt in this movie, you know, and lost things. You know, Eric Hauser lost his glasses, Bradley hurt his legs a few times, and Evan fell into a thorn bush, which was hilarious. Now, obviously here it's just meant to show that Kong's basically kind of feeling humiliated and kind of like sort of embarrassed or, you know, ashamed of himself because he felt like he did wrong. It's meant to show him his more, I guess, human side, essentially. So we kind of wrote him in as kind of like this very almost curious, yet I want to say more kind of mentally unstable personnel who kind of just doesn't understand how the world works. So for Kong, it's just meant for him to be more sympathetic in a way. So he's just kind of just feeling like he failed. It's his sense he feels like he failed, and he's been an outcast his whole life. You know, we are writing in, this is the last of his kind, and, you know, he's very unsocial, so any kind of social interaction he has is impossible, or it fails, and it just leaves him in a bad, depressing state. And obviously Anne realizes, wait, you know, like, this is actually, it healed me, and she's completely misjudged the character. There is a lot of symbolisms about bad judgment and discrimination and so on with groups and creatures and stuff. And here we have the Pteranodon. Now, obviously, the Pteranodon, I do apologize, does look pretty bad as a stuffed animal, but it was really the only option we had. The only thing I did was really modify his eyes, because the eyes did look goofy, even though that looked goofy enough. And a lot of this was just, he was strung on a fishing line. A lot of the air-based creatures and effects were done through fishing lines. So this is just Bradley holding the Pteranodon and trying to shoot away while the Pteranodon just flies around on a fishing line. I think it actually came out pretty well. I know later on Toys R Us does have this really nice Pteranodon figure, but unfortunately by the time we filmed this, it was too late to go back. And here comes Jack to the rescue. I did mostly try to build up their relationship while they were on the ship, and really it's only till around this time in the movie that he confesses how he feels about her. And it's just it's more for Anne to be more of a struggle, like, do I help Kong out, or do I just quickly go with Jack, because this is probably my only option. So, this cliff area was, a lot of the cliff area of the island here was actually in a sand pit down where I'm at, where I live, and the sand pit's pretty high up, so we just stuck the actors there, and we put the tripod on the camera and just tilted it to the right angle to where they looked like they were on a cliffside. Now, when Jack and Anne jump into the water, they're supposed to fall from the mountain into the river, and that takes them quicker back to the wall. And the majority of, like, the water stuff we filmed, most of the swamp scene was filmed in the pond, but a lot of the river stuff and any other pickup shooting we shot in my aunt's swimming pool. And it actually came out pretty handy. Now, what's interesting, though, is that we were filming this swimming pool. We had people on standby in case people drowned or in case there were trouble. Sylvana couldn't swim, unfortunately, and so we always had to have somebody. We had Kayla there as a lifeguard to just make sure she didn't fall into deep water. So anything with her in the water was mostly filmed in shallow because we didn't want her to fall into deep end and, you know, basically drown. Now, this shot coming up, this wide shot here of Kong, I love that because that's Bradley on a green screen with a matted shot of the top side of the mountain at Universal Studios. And what I did was I did film the mountains at a certain angle to where there was blue skies, and that way, when you do the chroma key, you can matte out the sky, which came out pretty well. Now, this scene is, again, from the 96 draft, where Jack does confess his love to Anne right in the middle of the woods before they get to the wall. There was a lot more of a time limit in terms of how Jack and Anne were, how Jack was going to get Anne back. There was a bit more of a time limit of when the wall would be open. So there was supposed to be more of a fast-paced energy in terms of trying to get from point A to B. But yeah, this was, again, shot in an afternoon out in the woods with Brett and Silvana. And it's interesting because, like, they read the script, obviously, but they completely forgot they had to do this kiss scene. And thankfully, I just said, you can kiss once. And that was about it. So they were a real sport about it. I did plan it very quickly, this kiss. So we had it where we did this 360 camera trick, and they just did this long kiss, and it came out really well. So that was pretty ballsy of them, I will admit. Sort of this very kind of classic Hollywood romantic feel to it, which I like. Now we're coming up on Kong's capture. Again, a lot of this was mostly based on the 96 draft and put into the script. We obviously have here the extras, natives, the kids at summer camp, basically bowing down and doing this all staged for Denham's crew. And the whole idea where the crew were just basically holding them at gunpoint while Denham films as they set up the trap. It's very, very capitalist colonialism sort of symbolism, and just basically just making it all look good for cameras while they all come off as very persistent assholes. And yes, they did. I did write in where they did have a radar to keep track of everything. Unfortunately, the only thing I forgot to really add into the story is, like, how do they keep track of the people on the island? Well, again, this is takes place in 2013, so cell phones have good. I like to think that Skull Island has really good phone reception. So if you're mapping out the area, you're able to use, I don't know, Google Maps or something to track where you're going. So they had that kind of technology when they were keeping track of the crew out in the jungle. And yes, it is implied that they killed the chief. They just straight up murdered him, and just Jake basically, or Denham, declared himself chief. Which I think is pretty evil, I'm not gonna lie. Some of the roof, some of the top areas of the wall was mostly shot on a stage at the summer camp, but some of the shots didn't come out too well, so what I did was I basically reshot some scenes on my back porch and just matted in the wall later. Again, a lot of this is based on the original film when Jack and Anne do get back to the wall, and everything's kind of, the dialogue's about the same until Jack discovers, wait, what are my crew doing with the natives here? And it's like, oh no, they're enslaving them and using them to trap Kong. And at this point too, yeah, like, the crew have completely turned on Jack because, you know, I like to think that the majority of the sailors and stuff on the Venture are mostly people who have served jail time, or kind of like cutthroat villains and scoundrels, so very kind of a pirate-esque crew, essentially, is what I was kind of going for with the main sailors of this, that they're all hardened criminals who are basically working for the system, you know, to pay off their jail time, essentially. It's like, you know, either go to jail or, you know, serve on this boat for a couple of years to pay off your parole. Of course, yes, that's me in a cowboy hat. I tried to go for a very kind of Napoleon-esque feel. It's a form that Alfred Hitchcock does, a thing Alfred Hitchcock always does in his movies, where if you don't have an extra body on hand, the director will fill it in. So I would do the Hitchcock route where I would fill in the blanks and be that extra once or twice. So there I am in a cowboy hat looking like Chuck Norris, and or like looking like Texas Walker Ranger. And I'm just trying to do the best kind of Napoleon or kind of colonialist feel to it, like sort of like George Custer, essentially. I do love this bit here where it's like, it's very much on par with like a Disney film where you know, the bad guy turns out to be the person you obviously knew who he was the bad guy, but to the characters was completely unexpected. So this is very much based on, like, Clayton from Disney's Tarzan, this kind of betrayal feel to it, or Atlantis the Lost Empire.
I'm sorry, my old friend, but you can't interfere with business. Business? What are you talking about? I'm the captain. Not anymore, pal.
I love that. Just essentially that's where the mutiny happens, where, you know, Bob is now the captain of the ship and Jack is just kind of like his rank is taken down by a mutiny. Now this is all great. I love this whole bit where we just shot all the main stuff with the wall before the destruction, and basically had it where we had Bradley here just trash this gate and crush it and stomp it. And we basically shot about 2 or 3 takes of him just completely wrecking the gate, and just had a whole bunch of cameras set up everywhere to get those shots right. And thankfully it all came out really well. And if you notice too, the natives who were holding the gate, they were completely crushed, which is a nice little detail. And then you have Kong's capture. This is all mostly from the 2005 film where they use grappling hooks and ropes to tie Kong down. So a lot of this was just, you know, planning green screen elements, actors with rope, and then just having the rope off frame be thrown and having Bradley completely tied down. Whole idea is obviously to make it look like a scared animal. A lot of when we were filming the scene, we actually looked at reference footage of old films of explorers in jungles capturing elephants, and in India, like, you look at footage in India, they still capture elephants by using ropes and chains and stuff. And it is pretty sad and tragic, but for reference, it comes in pretty damn handy when you're filming a movie like this. But yeah, it's just seeing, like, animals be captured in that way, it's pretty bad. Now, we had a fog machine that day, so we were able to run it and have it where it looks like the gas grenades, which is pretty cool. That whole bit with the sailor slapping and to make Kong get triggered, I like that. That was in the 96 draft. I just feel like it's very 90s villain feel to it, you know, like Billy Zane in Titanic. Now, that was a complete accident, Bradley taking out that tree, but we had the cameras rolling, and I saw that footage of him knocking the tree down, like, oh, shoot, he knocked down a tree, so that actually came out pretty damn well. The majority of the sailors getting flung here are just Ken dolls that are just on the string that Bradley would just pull. And now we have the classic Kong rampaging through the village sequence. Now, all the huts for the village were just made out of wicker baskets, like little wicker baskets, and basically with Bristol board tops with cattail bark attached to it. I had to put in the Wilhelm scream, by the way. That was kind of a given. I figured that was the perfect place to put it. But yeah, it was just Bradley having a field day, just smashing all these little huts and scaffoldings, bamboo scaffoldings and stuff. And when we knew, I really wanted to burn down the village, because that was, again, from the Bull Goldman script where Kong does burn down the village. And the original concept was we were going to burn down the entire model. We were going to burn down the entire model wall, the huts, everything. So we were thinking about it, and we discussed it with, I discussed it with my dad, the producer, but we realized because we're in, like, kind of a woodland area, we were at risk of creating a forest fire, and we didn't want that. We didn't want to sign a permit or anything, so really all we did was just burn 1 or 2 of the huts, and then we had water on standby in case things got out of control, but most of the fire you see in this is mostly digital, but there are a couple of shots here and there out in the distance where, yes, we did burn down the huts. And unfortunately, none of that model really exists anymore. The cardboard pillars and gate, because it was so smashed up, we took a bonfire to it. We had a nice bonfire that day, and we just burnt the set down piece by piece. I love that. That was improv from Harley, who played the sailor here, and what's really hysterical is, like, we did a couple takes of that, and we kept that last one because we thought that was actually pretty funny. We tried to add little side gags wherever we go. And now we're back to the Skull Island Beach. Again, this was shot in the day, the same time we had the arrival sequence. This was a good time for Sylvana, because this was really the first scene where she had to be really emotional for Kong. We had her all completely ragged up with makeup and everything, and at first she's frightened, but once she sees that Denim is being a complete scumbag, she really starts to have sympathy for him. So, thankfully she was able to pull out those tears really well, and the trick with making actors cry on cue is that you gotta tell them to think of the most depressing thing imaginable without getting too upset. So, I just told Sylvana, think of something, the saddest thing for you, and she put out those tears and made it part of her character, and it came out really well. There was a lot of extra stuff that was in this sequence as well. Like, there was, in the original draft, we had it where Kong actually reclaimed Anne, and then Jack had a spear, and was thinking about spearing down Kong, and you know, Jack and Bob are saying, do it, and he's like, he can't do it, because he doesn't want to risk Anne getting hurt, but then Bob comes in and tells him, look, you're gonna get completely screwed if you don't do this, so Jack does it out of pure desperation, and lances Kong right through the knee, and that's what knocks him down to get the gas bombs going, and them knocking him out with by clubbing him. But again, it was too complicated, so we had to cut it out of the script. This whole bit here where, like, they're kind of celebrating, that's been in my draft since years ago, and a lot of my early versions of Kong that I wanted to do years ago. And I had it where it was more of a spoof of Curse of the Were-Rabbit, where, you know, Anne's crying, and then, like, Bob's like, oh, let us celebrate in your moment of sorrow, and they all look sad, and then they turn around and they just start cheering. But I think it's just, that was a joke I didn't feel worked for this version. Now, unlike most Kong films, I wanted to explain how the hell they got Kong back. And because we take place in present time, it was the way to go with the 76 remake, where they get a larger ship, a supertanker, to bring him back to New York. So, that's what we did here, essentially. And obviously, like, the actors that day were having a really good day shooting that sequence. It was a perfect weather, and after we wrapped, we had a really nice dinner out on the beach, had this nice little picnic. So yeah, the supertanker, a lot of this is just stock footage, but the majority of Kong in the tank is actually shot in a community center, in a gym. We had an empty gym that day, and we just shot it to make it look like the bottom of a supertanker as a miniature, and thankfully that actually came out pretty damn well. I'm actually really impressed that a basketball gym, of all things, does look like a supertanker, the inside of one of the tanks. Now, the shine on Kong, the kind of shiny reflectiveness on Kong's mask, it was unintentional, but, like, you look at it now and it's almost like he's sweating and he's just exhausted, and it just gives more sympathy for the character. Here we are in New York City. This is obviously footage of New York during the 4th of July weekend, when they have fireworks. And yes, I actually, around 2011, August 2011 it was, we were in the first year of filming, I made a vacation trip to New York City. And I managed to get all the background plates we needed for the stuff in New York, which was great. So a lot of this is legit Times Square, a lot of my footage. And this stuff, actually, the premiere of Kong is actually footage I shot at the Toronto International Film Festival. And there was a lot of celebrities and stuff here, and actually one cameo that most people miss here, right, this woman waving goodbye to the crowd as the flashes go off, that's Jennifer Aniston, believe it or not. Jennifer Aniston does make a cameo in this film, and it's very kind of, like, unintentional, but it came out pretty damn well. So that was Jennifer Aniston, everybody. So the theater, the whole theater, we obviously needed a stage for this. We tried to get more of a stage theater. Unfortunately, we had no luck, so what we did was we there's a local theater down in our town that we used, a stage theater, and we just used that for the majority of the day. We had the curtain and shot most of the Broadway stuff there with Denim. And the backstage stuff, this is all in my garage, and my garage always comes great if you need, like, sort of a backstage or kind of a workshop-looking environment, so a lot of this is just my garage, and it came out pretty well, I think. It also kind of does explain how they got Kong through into the stage, that there's this big garage door in the back of the theater, so it also adds a bit more of an explanation of how they get him into the theater. a lot of this dialogue is from the 96 draft, where it's explained that after the events of Skull Island, after they got back, Jack and Anne did split off for a bit and haven't seen each other since, so it's also implied that Anne essentially quit and left, so. The announcer is actually James Rolfe of Cinemassacre.com, also known as the Angry Video Game Nerd. I had met James a few times at one or two cons, and the second time I met him, we had this really great conversation about just Kong-related material, because he was at this con taking a break, and I just bumped into him. And we just started chatting, and I introduced myself, and I said, you know, hey, out of curiosity, I have my camera here, do you want to do a little audio cameo for my movie? And he said, yeah, sure. And I told him about what it was, and he was really fascinated with it. So I just said, it's just one line. You're going to be the announcer announcing Denim on stage. So he did that in one take, and I was very thankful for that. And since then, me and him have been talking a lot. James is a great guy to talk in person. Now, obviously we didn't have much of a crowd when we shot the Broadway stuff, so a lot of this crowd shots I had to get off stock footage websites. And the majority of the curtain stuff here is just Jake on a green screen with a spotlight. And anything with wide, we just had to shoot in the theater, essentially. The theater was mostly used for the wide shots. So a lot of this of Jack getting stage fright is from the 96 draft as well. It's also implied that when Denim is presenting Kong on stage, he's supposed to get the beast going by poking him with a spear, and he was supposed to get Jack to do it, but obviously at that point Jack refused, like, this is wrong, so Denim does it himself. And I wanted to put that in the script, but I thought it's a little too much going on, so we just had it where pretty much Denim screws Jack over and just gives him the 800,000 and then tells him to leave. I like to think that there was a whole bit in the script where Denim was supposed to keep all the money to himself and not really pay anybody. I mean, to be honest, nowadays, if you presented an animal like this, PETA would be on your ass, but we tried to make it where Denim kept this thing entirely secret, and once Kong is revealed, it is more phenomenal to see in person, and so the audience is kind of awestruck by it. Obviously, a lot of Jake's dialogue presenting Kong is from the original film, of originally dialogue given to Robert Armstrong. Now, this bit with Kong on display, we had a hard time figuring out how the hell we were going to shoot this, and we decided to obviously shoot it in my garage, but what we wanted to do was get the chains and the pillars. So obviously the one thing I did do was buy a ton of plastic Halloween chains during the Halloween season with the cuffs and everything, and spray painted them silver because they were pretty dull. The waist around Kong was actually a cardboard belt that I made, completely out of cardboard and spray painted. The crown I obviously had to get at a costume store, so we had to put a crown on him to emphasize the King Kong material. And the miniature stage itself is just two wooden tables that we just put together, and we placed the pillars on there, and poor Bradley had to sit there all day and have his arms out and everything, and it was very difficult to shoot this scene because we were always afraid the model of the pillars would fall off. It was a little difficult to shoot at the time. And also, we did shoot this on multiple cameras, so we had one angle for Denim's area, we had one area looking over low angle for Kong, close-ups of his feet, obviously. I do like this concept, too, where, like, to get Kong to roar, because obviously he's miserable, we have this concept where Denim has two stage handlers with long cattle prods, essentially, to make Kong roar by shocking him. Just adds more to kind of the cruelty motif of the story. So yeah, they use cattle prods to make Kong roar. Obviously you have Max Steiner's music playing for the show itself, which is a nod to the 2005 film. And all this with Anne here stopping the show. This was also from the 96 draft, where this is how the show essentially goes down the crapper. was that Anne would stop the show and tell everybody to go home. But back then it was 1930s, and it was a lot more acceptable to have display animals like this. So for her, it was more empowering. So in here, we tried to do the same thing, and it does work a little bit better.
Introduce you to Miss Anne Darrow, one of the bravest women I have ever met.
Some of the shots of the crowd are obviously at the Oscars, B-roll from the Oscars to add for shots. I do love that little kind of extra dick move that Dedham does, just in case things go wrong. He can just put the blame on Anne so that he doesn't have to take responsibility. Again, a lot of this curtain stuff was green screen, so for Sylvana, acting on green screen, it was difficult, but I kind of had to tell her ahead of time what was supposed to be there, and thankfully she was a really great sport about it. I do like this bit, actually, where, like, Kong is basically trying to, like, he's sort of less calm and more irritated whenever Anne is there, but it's also because he cares about her and maybe suffers a bit of sort of an anxiety about her, always worried about her. Denham was really trying to push the whole Beauty and the Beast aspect of the film, so I keep having it where Denham, any chance he gets, he'll find a way to put the Beauty and the Beast angle in there. Obviously, the press is meant to represent something like TMZ or whatnot, so we had, obviously, a couple of actors stand in for the paparazzi, and then intercut with, when I was at the Toronto Film Festival, I just got close-up coverage of the paparazzi flashing to add in to make it look more like a bigger crowd. A lot of the flashes on set were real flashes from the lights, as well as digital flashes that I added in later. These shots actually came out well, because these are, again, garage green screen shots that were shot outside. Obviously, Bradley is so tempted to take off that damn chain. It's great. There was a lot more questions asked from the crowd. I believe made into the cut where, like, they're like, you know, smile, and do you plan to marry Mr. Denham, man? Just little kind of side jokes to make them even more of a dick, essentially, make them more scummy. As the press are, essentially. Yes, that is Simon Cowell. I did use footage from America's Got Talent to fill in some of the blanks. That shot of the chain, the neck chain coming off, that was complete accident, but thankfully it came out on camera pretty well, so we just had it where he just broke them all off. And after that, those chains were essentially done. Getting people to panic on cue, we're finding extras to do that is very difficult, so a lot of that footage of the panic first starting to, like, get scared is actually, I believe from some sort of, like, there was some rapper that was doing a show and some guy shot up the crowd, so he would just have it where the crowd would start running, obviously, from the gunshots, but it came in handy for the panic scenes. A lot of the actors running away, a lot of the extras running away on green screen. I was at a local Comic-Con, and I brought my green screen with me, and I just asked people to just stand in for character scenes, so just little extras. So I just had them say, run this way, run that way, pose here, pose there, and it came out really well. Obviously, at this point, Denham does become the mustache-twirling villain who kidnaps the girl. Now, all this footage of the actors running, the extras running, that's from Blobfest, where they run out of the theater, like in the movie. And then this, I love that display of Kong, him smashing the building. That's just a big styrofoam sheet that we made to look like the sign, and Bradley just smashed through that, and that came out pretty well. The majority of Brett interacting with Kong in the square, it's not Times Square, it's actually Dundas Square in Toronto. New York, the places we shot for New York were mostly, there was obviously New York City for the backgrounds and some of the extras. The panic stuff was mostly B-roll from when they were shooting other movies. There's some shots in Toronto, and some of these shots are actually at Universal Studios. In fact, one of the cameos you saw there was Bernard Keir, who did the score for the movie. And while we're at it, yeah, Bernard was a real pleasure to working with, because we met through a confrontation group I was on. And I was talking about, like, I was talking to the group about, you know, looking for, like, people to help with my movie and everything. So one of the people who responded was Bernard, and he was actually working at he works at the Universal Parks, And I asked him, he wanted to do the music, and I said, have you had any experience? And he said, yeah, I worked on Prime Survival. And Prime Survival is an excellent Jurassic Park fan film. And he just offered to do the score for me, and what he came up with was absolutely brilliant. I love the score for this film, and we were talking about going for very much a 90s adventure movie on par with Waterworld or The Lost World, Jurassic Park. Getting up Bradley on green screen and him picking up the car. Now, obviously the car is a Barbie car. Barbie colors always come in handy for miniatures. And he just tossed that thing, and I just said boom, and he would react like there was an explosion. Some of the New York shots were actually just cardboard buildings shot in the parking lot in the middle of the night. And some of that was obviously green screen. This is one of my favorite scenes that came out, was the elevated train scene. Obviously, this is an iconic moment in any Kong film. And the way the miniature was built was, really, the whole bridge is just a 2D cardboard bridge on top of two construction legs. And we just added thankfully, I was at a thrift store, and I found this whole train set, this very good, perfect scale train set. And we just put the tracks on it, we put the trains on it, and we just had Bradley go to town with this train track. And that is actually legit subway footage from New York. It's half New York and half Toronto subway systems. But yeah, like those train models actually were really well scaled, so I'm really happy I got those. We were originally going to use Lego trains, but these actually I think came out way better. Obviously, there's a couple of shots here of the crowd looking. That's a homage to the old King Kong rides at Universal Studios. I love those explosion shots, by the way. Majority of those are actually from a lot of the ILM B-roll footage of these explosions I found on YouTube, so they came out really well. Getting a lot of B-roll of the police taking off in New York. Searchlight footage is actually really hard to come by, like perfect searchlight footage, so I had to use whatever I could. Again, New York, something obviously was going down that day. It's also difficult to find perfect helicopter footage at night, so thankfully that shot was pretty easy to obtain. Now, this is obviously Kong entering the East River. Now, a lot of this, there was a whole scene that we had planned that was going to be a huge homage to the Universal Studios attractions, where Kong would go across the Queensboro Bridge, frighten a bus of people, and then attack the Roosevelt Island tram, and then what would happen is that he'd be on the bridge, and he'd be cornered by all these helicopters in between the bridge, and then would jump into the river and disappear. The choppers wouldn't be able to find him, and they would take off as he goes down the river. Unfortunately, that was just way too difficult to film, so we essentially scrapped it. Here we have General Nevitt, who is obviously a nod to Colonel Nevitt in King Kong Lives, the sequel to the '76 remake. And the majority of the military was shot at a local military museum around where I live, and we just had a couple of the actors come in, as well as some of the people working at the facility were very kind enough to be extras. My dad especially was one of the commanders in the background. We called him Captain Brooke. And my dad was really enthusiastic about it because my dad served in Vietnam. So whenever we needed a question of how the military did stuff, he knew exactly what to do and how to direct. So a lot of this military stuff was actually directed by my dad because he knew exactly what to do in that type of situation. Now, Kong going across the river, this was shot in my neighbor's swimming pool. We took what we called the damage suit, meaning like we could just basically take the suit and do whatever we wanted with it. And we just put him on, we put the stunt head on Bradley, and he just essentially got in the pool, and we filmed all that coverage. We matted out the blue, and that is him going across the river. Now, this power line bit, obviously from the '76 remake, we just basically built this little miniature of the power lines where it was two poles with thread, like just basic string, and Bradley would just smash that thing, and then we matted in actual power lines. Now, tanks are a little difficult to find, to do models with, and we were going to do it with models, but that didn't come out too well, so I just used footage of war tanks actually in combat. That came out pretty well. And this is Evan actually on top of a tank. Like, they were really cool with letting us film on top of the tanks, which is pretty awesome. Law of Kong running through the streets. I actually was in New York, and I would be filming from behind a car, and I would point the camera out the window to get these shots, and then just have Bradley walk in place on a green screen. Now, the Empire State Building. Unfortunately, there's no Empire State Building in Toronto, so we had to use the Royal Hotel, which is right next to the Union Station. And it looked identical to the Empire State Building, and that's what we essentially used. A lot of these background plates were from when I went to the Empire State Building and just got a lot of background plates and stuff for the film. This footage of the NYPD is actually from when they were shooting the Avengers, which is pretty cool. Now, this bit of Kong fighting the military is obviously really mostly based from King Kong Lives, matching the shots kind of exactly. So it's just fun to have, like, a lot of the actors run around in military uniforms, just shooting at pretty much nothing and just making it up as you go along, and then just figuring out what to do with the footage later. The whole idea with Kong climbing the Empire State Building, essentially, is that we wanted to make it look like, obviously, for some, it's like the highest point of this island. But I think for Kong, there is sort of a symbolism that this is the closest thing to home he has. It's kind of like Skull Mountain, essentially. It's implied in sort of the 76 remake as well. Now, a lot of this shot was just... Actually, this isn't Bradley. Some of this footage of the suit is actually me. Because anything that was way too physical for Brad, I would do. So, what I did was I put the green screen near our telephone line, like a little antenna tower we have on the side of the house. And I would just climb this tower and interact with it, and then just mat in the building in the foreground. Obviously here, so this scene was essentially, it did go a bit longer, it did get a bit creepier, but I had to cut it because it just didn't seem appropriate for a film like this, so, originally, this scene was going to be a lot more wilder, essentially. I don't want to get into too much detail, but we cut the majority of it because we just felt it was too inappropriate and uncomfortable for the film, and also to kind of tone it down to more of a PG-13. So we just made it where, like, we reshot it, essentially, where Denim would shoot Anne and basically hold her hostage. But here it's just, Jake is just having a ball doing this insane snapped denim. Now, the gun he has is actually perfect. It's kind of a James Bond looking gun, but what's cool about it is it's just a little water gun that I just spray painted black. But it actually came out really well as this kind of hidden gun. Now, a lot of this was shot in my mother and father's room, and thankfully, like, since then, it actually got repainted, so thank God we filmed it the way it was and got everything we needed before it was repainted.
My mother told me never to hit girls.
A lot of this is inspired by Mighty Peking Man, essentially, because there's a whole bit where the bad guy does take the girl to a building and hold her hostage, and then the Peking Man attacks her. So that's what a lot of it is inspired by. Now, we had a very difficult time deciding what to do with Denim's death. It was really a choice between either falling to his death or doing where Kong essentially eats him. And I think we chose the better cliche one where he just falls to his death, very similar to a Disney film like Frollo and Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I think it was a better choice because a lot of people respond to that, and every time we screen this movie, they cheer, which is amazing. Because just Denim was just this great character that everybody loved to hate. A lot of this stuff here was inspired by the 2005 film when Anne finds Kong in the streets, but instead we placed it atop the Empire State Building. We originally wanted this room to be an office, but we unfortunately couldn't find anything that matched, really, or had time to find a proper location, so we just used my parents' room. Again, a lot of that is just me with a Barbie doll in my hand on a scaffolding, climbing up it with digital backgrounds. Now that's actually Bradley right there. It's really the only rare time that you see Kong's eyes. Something you'll notice in the film is that Kong's eyes are barely shown, and it makes his expressions more animal-like when you don't see his eyes. But when you see his eyes, it's very much more, you see more of the humanity in him, which I actually find really interesting. There's some good, I love that shot right there. That was basically, we set the green screen on the floor of on the grass of my back porch, and we just had Bradley climb the porch and just mat in the building. And here we have the Empire State Building. This was something that was obviously pre-planned and storyboard. There was a whole bit here where Anne was actually supposed to talk to Kong and say it was her fault that this all happened. And it was a lot, the dialogue was based on the original Mighty Joe Young, but I felt like it didn't really work for the story and it was padding too long, so we cut it out. Now, the original idea to shoot the climax, to shoot the whole Empire State Building, was to go more practical. We were going to be building, like, miniature set pieces of the building. And we were going to take the Jackass 2.5 route, where there's a whole skit where Preston and Wee Man do a King Kong bit where they're on top of a porta potty on top of a hill, and the whole crew fly RC airplanes at them. Now, obviously, it's a very dangerous stunt that they did, but we wanted to do it a bit more professionally, where we were going to be building the cone of the building, the edge of the building, and have the actor in the suit on top of a hill on this miniature stuff, also interacting with RC helicopters. Now, I had contacted a bunch of RC helicopters at the time to see if they'd be able to fly them, and I did get a few responses, but most of them were kind of concerned about how we were going to shoot it. So eventually we went with an easier approach where we filmed Kong on top of a green screen on a little platform and added in the cone and everything. But the telephone pole, like the whole communication mast, we just built that out of a broomstick and some tomato mesh wiring to give it that look. And the majority of the helicopter footage is B-roll from air shows and added in. And some of the shots are even just toy helicopters on strings, which I like. Now, the majority of this sequence as well, the helicopter pilots are obviously Joshua Botello and Eric Rice-Duke of YouTube. They came in late in the process, and we just needed some pilots, so we just had them be the main helicopter pilots. And the guns, the miniguns that used in the scene right here, is actually a Nerf gun painted silver, a Nerf Vulcan. That's a chain gun, and we just filmed that and displayed next to my van. The van substituted for the helicopter, which matched the miniature helicopters. So that's how that came about. We originally wanted to use a minigun, but we could never find a real proper toy minigun at the time, so we just used the Vulcan. Now, two of the helicopter pilots here is actually myself and Bradley, who played Kong. And there is an irony because it's something that's been done since the original, where the creators of the film or the directors would be the pilots that kill them. There's an infamous quote from Merian C. Cooper in the original where they were lacking pilots for the scene, so they said, you know, we made them, we should kill the son of a bitch ourselves. And that actually is Andy, who's been a really good neighbor of mine, and we just had him film for a day as one of the pilots. The scene was actually a lot longer. There was a lot more stuff that happened in the original animatic, which lasted for about 20 minutes. And we obviously had to cut it down to about 5 or 10. The majority of the choppers, like those ones, are mostly green screen CG elements, but they work really well. And there's me and Bradley going down. There were a lot of backgrounds I took at the Empire State Building to know where shots would go and everything, and so that's why there's a lot of great explosion effects and stuff for certain scenes. Now, a lot of stuff of Anne atop the building was not only green screen, but it was also shot in my sister's apartment building in Toronto, because my sister was living in Toronto at the time, and she had this great apartment building near the skyline of the city, so we just went up to the roof of the place and we filmed the whole ending. And obviously this is supposed to be a ladder where the cone is, but it was just more of a door thing that Silvana just slightly climbed to make it look like she was going up a ladder. Now, thankfully, we didn't get the suit that bloody. We just mostly got it in the face and the chest area and added fake blood. The majority of the blood is digital. We were originally going to have it where they're going to shoot paintballs at them, but just due out of safety for the actor, we just had it where they were all digital. So obviously me and a couple of the camp kids just shooting a green screen element. We also wanted to make the ending a lot more violent and bloody, obviously, because, you know, it just makes Kong's character a lot more sympathetic. This whole bit where the pilots decide, fuck the girl we're going to be shooting, a lot of that did come from the 96 draft, where originally Jack was supposed to pilot the plane and help Kong in the battle, and then when the villain plane see Anne, they're like, forget the girl, more civilian or the civilians of New York are more important than this one girl, so they were going to just shoot her down. So that was kind of the motive they were going for. There was a whole backstory as well as how the pilots were actually working for the government to shoot him down, and the military below had no say in the matter. And of course, Kong gets completely bloodied up. It's pretty brutal, I'm not gonna lie. And the one thing I had to do, obviously, because we were aiming for a PG-13, we had to get the one fuck in there. So we had Sylvana stay at the very end. She was originally supposed to say assholes, or bastards. We decided to go with fuckers. Obviously, a helicopter on string on a green screen just added in. Now, in this shot, unfortunately, we kind of couldn't find the doll, the Anne doll, so we had an Arwen figure from Lord of the Rings that Bradley was holding there. Now, some of the fall here is actually a stuffed Kong, which works, and a lot of people jump at this twist where Anne does fall with him, and that's something we haven't seen in a Kong movie before, so I figured it would be his last attempt at redemption to save her, where he would grab her as they fall, which is pretty good. Now, some of the footage we got of the extras was from Universal, obviously, like some of the backgrounds. This stuff is actually from Britain. There was a whole protest going on, so I just grabbed some footage from that. Now, the majority of the streets here, we just had to make it look like it was cracked, so we just had Brad on the in the parking lot on a black sheet with styrofoam pieces just kind of scattered over to make it look like it was damaged. And we just covered him in blood, and he was really good acting his Kong's final breaths here, which came out pretty damn well. Now, in the backgrounds, they're actually from Universal Florida and the New York backlot, and in the background you can see the Blues Brothers playing, and I saw that I was on the right angle where I thought, hey, this could look like the crowd seeing Kong die, so I just took that background and just matted it into the shot. We did try a day to shoot the whole ending in Toronto, but unfortunately, like, we were just having a very frustrating time that day, so we just essentially canceled it and shot it all on green screen. I felt it worked a lot better. These shots actually came out pretty well with the crowds. It's just shooting multiple people at the same time. This was shot in Old Town Newmarket. For the last day of shooting, we shot this stuff, was with Brett reacting to what was happening. Now, some of the dialogue, the press questioning Anne in these shots, that was ADR'd actually by Doug Walker, Tamara Chambers, and Malcolm Ray of Channel Awesome. I met them at a con, and I just said, hey, you want to do this? And they said, yeah, sure. So I just had them doing this audio of the paparazzi, and it came out actually pretty well. Doug was a real funny guy to do on that. Sean Ward of the Sean Ward Show on YouTube makes a cameo here as the Mickey Mouse guy. Really cool guy. Love to work with him. Now, obviously, this was all the way back from 1975 by Bull Goldman, where the ending was supposed to have Fay Wray say the final lines of the film, saying it was Beauty Killed the Beast, as sort of a symbolism, or sort of a pass of the torch, essentially. Now, unfortunately, by the time Peter Jackson did his remake, Fay Wray died, and so this is more of a homage to that. And luckily, our neighbor was a really talented stage actress, and she came in and just shot that whole ending on a green screen. That was actually the last thing we shot in the movie. Now, this is obviously like a 2D background, but I figured it was better than nothing, so... But yeah, this movie was overall a great experience. It was a real learning curve for all of us to really figure out how to make a feature. For my first feature, as a test, it's a successful test. It's very experimental, very, you know, figuring out what type of effects to do and whatnot. And honestly, I'm really proud of how it came out. So, you know, from writing the script to pre-planning it to filming it for the span of 3 to 6 years, budgeting it, and all the way down to the premiere, it was a wonderful time. And obviously the script, the main influence was a lot of the people who wrote the script, Merian Cooper, Ruth Rose, and Edgar Wallace. All these guys, honestly, if I'd not seen the original Kong or the 76 remake, I probably wouldn't be making movies at this point. My mother and father doing the producer work, Real Sports letting us film this thing for 6 years, putting up with all of us. Thank you to both of them for letting me the chance to do my favorite, remake my favorite film. And also from the cast and stuff, I would like to see maybe a cast commentary at some point. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but that'd be great. So yeah, it was just, this is a film I'm really glad I finally got off the ground, because this is something I had been really wanting to do probably since, I'd say, 2004, when I was getting back into making movies after a long break on a DVD cam with these little Lego films. I tried once to remake Kong on DVD cam with Legos and toys. Didn't come out too well. I remade it, obviously, again when I started YouTube, and then I remade it again in 2010 as a reenactment with more professional-looking Lego animation. Then years down the line, I just did this 6-year, $4,000 live-action feature film with nothing but practical effects, and would I do it again? I probably would. Like, I would love to do, like, the 96 draft in its entirety, set in the 30s as a very Indiana Jones-type movie. I just don't know when. I know I've got other projects I do want to do first before I really get into that, but to all the cast and crew and everybody who supported us, thank you all so much for helping me make this film. It was a wonderful experience and a lot of fun to work on. Great times with great friends, and yeah, it just really helped me progress into doing a lot better films and doing better special effects. So from all of us here at Big Jack Film Studios and myself and everybody, thank you so much. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed this audio commentary. Thank you all for sticking around and listening to me rant about this movie and discuss what went on. Enjoy, I guess, the rest of your day. Maybe get up and go take a pisser or something. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. This was wonderful to let you guys hear what I have to say, and I'm just rambling on at this point, so I'm going to take off. This is Jack signing off, and have a good day.